welcome to my channel. I'm Mila Macedonia and my channel is dedicated to the Macedonian struggle, Macedonian human rights and our fight for self-determination. If any of those are of interest to you, then definitely give my channel a follow. I just want to preface this audiobook with a short introduction explaining why I've created it into an audiobook. Now, Macedonia Above All is Stojan Georgiev's autobiography. Stojan Georgiev, whose full name is Stojan Nikolov Georgiev Tomovichin, is a Macedonian from Petrich in Pirin Macedonia. He was one of the founders of OMO Ilinden in 1990 and was its first president. This was and is effectively an umbrella organisation formed of other Macedonian organisations at the end of Bulgaria's authoritarian communist regime. Now, this must not be confused with the political organisation, which is OMO Ilinden-Pirin. As you know, a few weeks ago, I interviewed one of the presidents of this political organisation, Dr. Stojko Stojkov, and he distinguishes them and elaborates on their history as well. So if you haven't watched that, definitely do. Now, Stojan Georgiev was, however, actually made an honorary president of OMO Ilinden-Pirin, the political organisation, in 1998. And in the period of 2006 to 2007, he was a member of the Central Council of this party. And then in 2007 to 2010, he was its co-president, after which he actually retired for health reasons. But Stojan Georgiev dedicated his whole life to fighting for the rights of Macedonians from Pirin Macedonia. And he actually began his journey after he was discriminated against at school as a teenager for being Macedonian. This autobiography is an essential text for understanding the Macedonian struggle, especially in Pirin Macedonia. Listening to this audiobook, you will fully understand exactly why Mr. Georgiev was a former president of both OMO organisations. And there's a song dedicated to him as well, which I will be covering on my channel. And I will be releasing a lot more content on Pirin Macedonia. So follow if you want to learn more for that reason as well. I hope you enjoy this audiobook. I hope you listen to the whole of it. And do leave a comment and let me know what you think.
Macedonia Above All by Stojan Nikolov Georgiev Tomovichin, published in 2012. Introductory dedication from the author.
To the countless recognized and unrecognized patriots, martyrs for the Macedonian cause, and to my life partner Maria, who bore all the hardships during my years of imprisonment, and afterwards, and to this day, continues to do so with dignity.
About the author, and regarded with dignity. Before us is a manuscript of documentary prose, a brilliant contribution by the author to the treasury of the revolutionary struggle of our people. Not only because of the text it offers us, on its own, it is merely a pale reflection of the author's life drama. The essence of this manuscript lies in the unity naturally created between life and words. The manuscript is composed of three parts, of three seemingly independent units. They, in fact, intertwine and become one the moment the reader highly awakens to the closing of the book's covers. Inside that book is everything that happens between yourself, and to such a complementary degree that we are rightly tested. If the book were twice as long, it still would have seemed too little. If it were cut in half, would our sufferings have, perhaps, been more bearable? It is, of course, understood, neither the first nor the other. The manuscript is precisely as it needs to be, essential to sense the likelihood that we will soon have an even more complete documentary insight into all human sufferings on the theme of homeland. The manuscript carries the title, Macedonia Above All. I have the impression that this exact title reflects all the essences and messages of Stojan Georgiev's life. It is not an uncontrolled youthful outburst, anarchic, but rather a thoughtfully chosen life path, a considered perspective. Above all youthful impulses, all virtues, of highest importance is the drive and dignity of the homeland. Above all temptations stands the temptation of the homeland. The home has its own meaning. A child in the home still has it in high regard. But what does all that mean without the belief in freedom? Man is born free and lives to be free, and outside this context, Everything is deception and illusion. The brother and sister, the mother and father, love and youth exist only because of the belief in freedom. Above all that exists is only this belief and the homeland. That's why it is Macedonia above all. In that Macedonia above all is captured one youth and part of a dramatic childhood. That youth has been transformed into constant political surveillance, into an afterlife of police harassment, into brutal reckonings, into animalistic outbursts to police rage and insolence. Youth was transformed into cells, into killings, into the most direct encounters with death. Nowhere was police investigation and control perfected as it was in countries of real socialism. Nowhere and never was a person so deprived of rights as in socialist police setups. Thus the spirit of hundreds and thousands of innocent youths was destroyed, and thousands and millions of nameless and innocent victims vanished in concentration camps. Stojan Georgiev, the author of this manuscript, is by some chance alive. But what does that mean? Only confirmation that something exceptionally insignificant was missing for that life to be turned to dust and forgotten. The manuscript, Macedonia Above All, is an exceptionally important document that will find its place in the rich memoir and historiographical material, which will serve for careful and comprehensive analyses of the revolutionary struggle of the Macedonian people from its imperialist division year until today. This imperialist division of Macedonia in 1913, or more precisely, the occupation of Macedonia by Bulgaria, Greece, and Serbia, continues in most of the Macedonian territory. Both the Pirin part and the Aegean part of Macedonia are still under occupation. And regardless of all the pretenses and platitudes of Yugoslav diplomacy, the occupation remains an absolute fact to this day. This manuscript by Stojan Georgiev excellently documents this fact, and this aspect, among others, should be considered as additional significance of the manuscript. This truth was concealed by false statements about some traditional friendship, instead of being presented in its real light to the world, and to internationalize the resolution of this most urgent issue of peace in Europe. It was masked and frozen, all to facilitate the continued unimpeded assimilation of the Macedonian people and the annihilation of their independence through bursts of pure genocide. In this sense, Georgiev's manuscript holds the weight of a complete historical document, as he participated in the internationalization of the Macedonian issue as a delegate before international legal institutions in Copenhagen this year. Stojan Georgiev is just one among the thousands of Macedonian victims from the division of Macedonia to this day. Thousands of Macedonians remain forever forgotten in the cold of history, fighting brother against brother, forcibly mobilized into the armies of the occupiers of Macedonia, the Bulgarians, Greeks, and Serbs. Thousands of Macedonians lie forgotten in the cold of history, covered with foreign flags and the graves of foreign empires and kingdoms. And not only those from the Balkan Wars, but also those who disappeared afterwards in the prisons and dungeons of Sofia, Athens, and Belgrade, those forgotten on Greek islands and in Bulgarian concentration camps. Let us not forget that the first partisan Macedonian unit in the Second World War was formed in Pirin Macedonia. Let us not discuss the fact that for the whole 5 years in the Primoarski, Aegean part of Macedonia, the national revolution of the Macedonian people was led. It was from this part that it all ended with immense betrayal, and with the political and economic exile of dramatic proportions. Stojan Georgiev's book is an excellent reminder of this fate. In the state-perfected torture chambers of Sofia, methods borrowed from the medieval Inquisition were used against Macedonians. It is no secret that Macedonians were subjected to branding with heated and red-hot iron to incapacitate them for full reproduction. Such barbarism will eventually come to the attention of the international public and courts. However, I mention this to highlight the modesty of Stojan Georgiev, who, in his manuscript, avoids describing these tortures. He does this not by accident. Georgiev simply does not want to divert attention to the margins, to what remains more fleeting compared to the ideal. And his fundamental ideal is the freedom of Macedonia, its national and natural territorial unity. That unity, today, mostly depends on the Macedonian people. Peace in the Balkans, and thus peace in Europe, greatly depends on the resolution of the Macedonian national question, which should be understood as the absolute freedoms of the Macedonian people in the two occupied parts, both in the Aegean and Pirin regions. The new European identity will only constitute an economic and political anonymous crowd of people, which numbers will not differ from the numbering of objects to the extent that this identity does not incorporate authentic national cultures. In this sense, freedom for all nations of Europe is essential. Freedom for the Macedonian people before anything. European culture and freedom in Europe will not exist if some countries isolate themselves from others, to the extent that those countries, if these countries are reduced to something that does not distinguish them. We need diversity within unity, but above all, what we need is freedom and national equality for all. A country that voluntarily isolates itself from others and prevents the rights of Macedonians consciously places itself as a factor against peace in Europe. It is more certain that the coming times will not favor those who close their eyes to historical and real facts. Stojan Georgiev is a brilliant witness to an amputated life, with severe phantom pains arising from his amputated part. That amputated part is not something that could be invented and discarded. That part is life itself. From day to day, everything becomes clearer. The process of Macedonian spiritual unification today cannot be stopped by anything. This process already can no longer be extinguished. The manuscript, Macedonia Above All, is an absolute confirmation of this, and a shining example of a heroic son and an act of high national dignity. That who was trapped within the walls of prisons and torture chambers, no matter the path, continues to call for reason. It is a fierce cry calling for help and unity. The essence of dignity and the right to choose one's life path. These two things confirm the human being. Stojan Georgiev vividly recounts a lesson from the Macedonian chronicles and romance. Signed, Ante Popovsky.
The beginning. When on the 18th of May 1990, around 6 in the afternoon, I returned home from work, and under the front door I found a small envelope with a letter addressed to me with no sender information. I opened it, and what did I see? A summons from the district prosecutor in Blagoevgrad. I was required to appear in the office of His Majesty the Prosecutor at 9 in the morning on 21st May 1990. I said to myself, well, they've finally remembered me. One day before that, through Bulgarian television, the following was announced. The Chief Prosecutor of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, after reviewing the documents submitted by the Committee for the Protection of the Constitution of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, emphasized that the IMRO, Independent Ilinden Organization, whose activities are directed against the security and territorial integrity of Bulgaria, issued a proposal to the president of the organization, Georgi Solunsky, to register the organization as a political party within a month, or to dissolve it, which ultimately meant the same thing. I say the same, because under the new law on political parties in the People's Republic of Bulgaria, published in the State Gazette, a political party based on minority, national grounds cannot be registered, such as our organization. The United Macedonian Organization, OMO Ilinden, was established on 14th April 1990 in the town of Sandanski, at a meeting attended by the leaders of 4 organizations: IMRO, Independent, Ilinden, Committee for the Protection of the Rights of Macedonians from the Pirin part of Macedonia, Cultural and Educational Society, Jan Sandanski, from the village of Mikrevo, and the Committee of Repressed Macedonians in the Pirin part of Macedonia. The United Macedonian Organization set a goal to unite all Macedonians who hold sacred the ideals of Gotse Delchev Damian Gruev, Gheorghe Petrov, Iane Sandansky, and others. According to the organization's constitution, any citizen of the People's Republic of Bulgaria can become a member, regardless of their political views, social and material status, or religious affiliation, as long as they are not compromised before the Macedonian people with dishonorable and immoral acts. According to the program, the organization will strive for the spiritual unification of Macedonians not only in Bulgaria, but also for those living outside of it, in all corners of the world. It is especially emphasized that we are not in favor of violating the territorial integrity of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, contrary to what is being said and is being written in the newspapers, broadcasted on the radio, and shown on television in Bulgaria, where they call us traitors, separatists, servants of Skopje, and many other names, all with the aim to destroy our credibility and dignity. Some even label us as political and criminal offenders, insignificant people. They write, "Warning separatists," as if a train is coming from the opposite direction, which can, in any moment, crush you. This constant, and sometimes even hourly, persecution through the airwaves and print media has discouraged and frightened many people. It is widely rumored that after the elections, the most active members of OMO Ilinden will be sentenced and left to rot for decades in prison. Exactly in that spirit was the summons I received from the district prosecutor to appear before him today, on 21st May 1990, as I write all this in Skopje. Fortunately, a few days before that, I had received a phone invitation from Miroslav Spirovsky to attend the folk festival Valandovo 90, and at the meeting of the border crossing with Greece near Gevgelia. Despite the extremely tense and critical situation, my wife and I headed toward the Zlatarevo border crossing. I didn't carry any documents with me because I knew that the Bulgarian customs officials would be very strict with me. Even though they conducted a brief inspection of my luggage, I was held at the border for about 40 minutes, while they consulted with security officials in Petrich, Blagovevgrad, and perhaps even Sofia. Finally, they said to me, "You can go." With a simple wave of my hand, I bid farewell to my wife and proceeded to Macedonia. At the Macedonian customs, I was warmly greeted by friends from Skopje. In Gevgelia, I met the organizers of the meeting, we drank coffee together, and later that evening we headed to dinner and spent the night by Lake Doiran. I had never even dreamed in my life so far, and I am 52 years old, that I would ever have the opportunity to visit this beautiful Macedonian lake, where every evening the rich Greeks gamble in the taverns and pay bills worth thousands of dollars. Didn't the head of the police in Petrich, Kosta Mihalchev, often tell me many years ago, "Stojan, you will only see Macedonia on the map"? It was only natural that after the years of torture, from 1956 until this very day, I had lost all hope that one day I too, like other people, would have the chance to enjoy the beautiful nature of Mother Macedonia. Perhaps I wouldn't have been in such a state if I hadn't been born in the city of Petrich, where in the 50s and 60s, while I was a boy, Macedonian revolutionary marches and songs were constantly sung everywhere, which we listened to through Radio Skopje, despite the ban by the Bulgarian authorities. Perhaps I wouldn't have formed my identity as a Macedonian if my mother hadn't told me the story of her father, Ivan Narkov, who spent 5 full years in the Thessaloniki prison, Edikul, as a fighter for the liberation of Macedonia from Turkish rule. My grandfather Ivan was born in the village of Matnica, on the southern slopes of Mount Belasica, which today is located in the Aegean part of Macedonia, in Greece. He was a participant in the national liberation struggle of the Macedonians, and after a betrayal led to a crackdown, he was arrested and sentenced by the Turkish court to 5 years of strict dungeon imprisonment. My father's grandfather, who was born in the Macedonian village of Bogoroitsa, today's village of Sestrino, on Mount Ograzden, in the Pirin region of Macedonia, was named Georgi Jankulski. When he was young, he was very spirited, so the villagers called him Deli Georgi, Warrior Georgi. One Sunday, Deli Georgi went into the forest with his father's donkey to gather firewood. On that same day, His best friend was supposed to get married, whose name today no one remembers. Returning from the forest with the firewood, Georgie was surprised that he couldn't hear the drumming from the wedding. He asked his mother why there was no music, and she told him that the gypsy musicians were playing mani for the Turks in the village tavern. Georgie put both pistols in his belt and went to the tavern. When he asked the gypsies why they weren't playing at the wedding, they silently nodded towards the Turks, who were quite contentedly drinking their rakia. As soon as the Turks understood what was happening, they told my grandfather, "Bak isheni bigyar," which means, "Mind your own business, infidel." Before they had even spoken their last words, Georgie drew his pistols, and in the same moment took down the Turks. He then calmly sent the gypsies to the wedding. When my mother found out what her son had done, she wept sadly and said to him, "Son, for you there's no longer a place in this village. Run, son, wherever you can before the other Turks arrive." Like that, my great-grandfather Georgie left the village of Bogorodica and became a shepherd in the then small settlement of Petrich. This was around 1880. Here, after some years, Georgie, now a grown man, married the beautiful girl Stoitza from his village, who would continue our Bogoroisin tribe in today's beautiful town of Petrich. Even today, on the northern slopes of the legendary Belasica, there is an area of about 40-50 hectares called Bogoroitsin Fields, in memory of Georgie's settlement from the village of Bogoroica. Great-grandfather Georgie and great-grandmother Stoitza had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The older son, Tomo, married my grandmother Elena, and they had 3 sons, Ivan in 1906, Nikola, my father, in 1908, and Vasil in 1910. They would continue Georgie's Macedonian lineage, whose roots are deeply embedded over the years, on the slopes of Mount Ograzden, slopes sown with the bones of thousands of Macedonian fighters, slopes soaked with many bitter tears from wounded maidenly honor, and slopes that recall the fierce battles of Macedonian revolutionaries from the late past and the early 20th century. The slopes that, 130 years after Georgie's birth, still tell the story of his deeds and those of his worthy descendants. Worthy because his son Tomo died in 1912 for the freedom of Macedonia. After the death of my grandfather Tomo, his wife Elena, with 3 ungrown young children, was given the nickname Elena Tomovicina, and the children, God rest their souls, were called Ivan Tomovichin, Vasil Tomovichin, and Kolyo Tomovichin until they passed away. Worthy descendants because even Tomcho, the son of Vasil Tomovichin, was killed by the Bulgarian border guards when he was only 24 years old, under the pretext that he was trying to illegally cross the border with Greece. Worthy, I say, because even the great-grandchildren of grandfather Georgie, the sons of Nikola Tomovichin, Stojan and Ivan, have spent their entire lives fighting for the national rights of the Macedonians from the Pirin region of Macedonia. On 18th March 1938, in the small border town of Petrich, nestled at the foot of Belasica, a male child was born into the family of Nikola Tomovichin and Mitra Ivanova Nakova, and they named him Stojan. Perhaps they chose the name in anticipation of the strong character this resilient child would develop. Stojan, so that he could stand firm and endure the storms of the time, during those turbulent times when it was easier and less offensive in Bulgaria to call yourself Bulgarian rather than Macedonian. Today in Bulgaria, for a Macedonian to call himself a Bulgarian means to gain everything: a good job, preferential treatment in higher education institutions, respect from the authorities, and peace of mind. Everything. But for the one who has the courage to declare himself a Macedonian, tough times for him. It was especially difficult during the years of the totalitarian regime in Bulgaria. To loudly declare that you are a Macedonian meant that you were prepared to take on moral, physical, and any other form of responsibility. In the autumn of 1956, I was already an 11th grade student at the first secondary school, P.O.K. Yavorov. At the beginning of the month of October, in the hall of the reading room, called Brothers Miladinovci, the first secretary of the district committee of the BKP in Blagovevgrad, Boris Vaptsarov, the brother of the Macedonian poet Nikola Vaptsarov, arrived to give a lecture on the Macedonian question. The topic of the lecture was Macedonia, a geographical term. The man read his paper, which made me very angry because up to that point I had read very little about Macedonia and the Macedonian people. However, the environment in which I was raised, I was nourished with that kind of milk and yeast that, despite the many twists and turns in life, I remained my entire life Macedonian. At that time I asked Vaptsarov two questions. Where did the ancient Macedonians go after the arrival of the Romans on the Balkan Peninsula? And what did Gotse Delchev, Damjan Gruyev, Gors Petrov, Yanis Andansky and their like-minded colleagues fight for? Boris Vaptsarov's answers were very superficial and unconvincing. For the first question he answered, the Macedonians were Greeks, and for the second, Gotse Delchev and his like-minded colleagues were Bulgarians and fought for the liberation of Macedonia and its annexation to Bulgaria. Naturally, I was not satisfied with either of the answers, so I left the hall and immediately set about making a new printing plate with the inscription, Macedonia. For 3 nights, using a knife, needle and other tools, I crafted the plate, prepared in a box for shoes a tampon from absorbent paper, soaked in, and began to print thousands of copies with that single word, Macedonia. One word and one small conspirator kept the entire police force in the Blagoevgrad district on edge for the next 2 months, until that November day, Wednesday 26th, November 1956, when, in front of the entrance to our high school, my friend Tomata and I were stopped by 2 agents from the state security. But about this I'll speak later. When I was in the 9th grade of high school, I met a dark-eyed girl. She wasn't very pretty, but she spoke so sweetly as if honey was flowing from her mouth. No, something who knew what she was saying, but rather, under the strain of being 15 or 16 years old, she awakened a feeling of ideal in me, for which I would give everything for. But the girl had already found a boyfriend, and I was left disappointed by the unrequited love. In 1954, in the 9th grade, I was in the same class as a boy from our neighborhood. His name was Lupcho Rupayov, and he was a very poor student in mathematics. Anyway, Lupcho finished the 9th grade, while I, who had only 3 grades of an average of 3, and the rest were 4s and 5s, failed. Why? Because I was a Macedonian. This was the first time I encountered Bulgarian prejudice, and from then on my long and difficult path to Macedonia began. In the 9th grade, Bulgarian language was taught by a native of Sofia, with the surname Georgieva. I don't know why, but we students amongst ourselves called her a goat. This lady would get very annoyed with me because I made no effort to speak literary Bulgarian. When I recited a lesson, I spoke the way we spoke at home. I regularly used ki kav, a local dialect, and never used the particles shti and sh and e to express future tense verb forms. I used typical Petrich expressions, begaite, this means run away, ilaite, come here, nemoite, don't, neku, I won't, sakam, I want, bendisuvam, I like, uidisuvam, I approve, kedom, I will go home, ketepam, I will continue, kepisham, I will write, and many other expressions that she couldn't understand. And when I said maxus skapa muskata na brdako, a local dialect expression, she simply went mad. Well, I told her, deliberately using the local dialect, this is the Macedonian language. For that Macedonian language that I demonstrated in front of her, I lost the entire year. I was very angry about it, especially since I was among the best students in the class, and in mathematics, no one could solve problems better and faster than me. My classmates teased me. The student passed to the 10th grade and the teacher stayed to repeat the 9th grade. The teacher was me because I helped Lupcho with math. I lost a year, and I mourned so much over it that the following year, when I repeated the 9th grade, I went to school with no interest, despaired, and with a deflated mood. Now I realize that my anger was in vain for that lost year, because after that what I lost due to proving our Macedonian independence is 10 times greater, more significant, and more terrifying. In the 10th grade I caught up with Lupcho again and we went to and from school together. That was in the year 1955. Already young men, almost every evening Lupcho and I would go out for a walk. In those years, it was traditional to walk in 2s or 3s. From the restaurant, Yavorite, which we then called the park, to the city square of Petrich, there poured an uninterrupted line of people moving in both directions. If you wanted to meet someone, you had to find them here, understood that they were out on a walk. Lupcho and I started to be interested in two girls from the 8th grade at the high school, where we also studied. Their names were Velichka and Vaska. Both lived in our district. Over the next 3-4 months, we constantly sought ways to meet and talk with them. Winter was quite frosty, and we gathered a lot of cold before we finally managed to persuade them to talk with us. It was already May 1956, and nature had adorned itself with its colourful floral transformation. The Petrich mountain completely advertised its unique bird chorus, that beautiful serenade, as each bird sang more beautifully and melodiously to perform its morning repertoire, to prove its love for its beloved. Amid the multi-toned chirping, the song of the nightingale stood out with its sweet, extended pu-pu-pi, pu-pu-pi. And besides the great intellectual abilities, man still cannot unravel the secret of bird language, to be able to describe the enchantment of their chirping. It is known that they have their own way of communicating, but what kind? And the spring aroma of blooming grasses, the breath of the fresh and the green air, penetrates the souls of thousands of bees that continuously fly from flower to flower, tirelessly departing and returning, driven by the instinct to gather nectar for their offspring, not realizing that in this mad race, after about 40 days of living, they depart from this world without return. And in that wild hustle of living nature, amidst the coolness of the fresh Balkan air, I and my Velichka were slowly climbing up the lovers' lanes by the hunting lodge. At last, after months of fruitless pursuit of our girls, they believed that Lupcho and I were serious young men, so that the following dialogue occurred between me and Velichka. "Tell me, Velichka, why did you avoid stopping and talking to me for so long?" "Well, because I think I'm still too young," she said. Indeed, at 14 years old, she was a fragile, delicate girl who had just begun to shape into a young woman of average height. But I liked her very much, and I wanted to have her as a future girlfriend. That's why I very much persevered to talk. "Velice, don't you see that all winter I've been running after you? I've been looking for you all this time to see you at the window. Whenever I pass by," I said seriously. She lived 400 to 500 meters away from our house, and the shortest route to the high school, which I took twice a day, was their street, Kirili Metodi. Every time I passed by their house, she would be staying by the window. So every day with a gaze she met me and saw me off until that spring day finally came. I was talking to her, and she, with her head bowed, remained silent and fidgeted with the tip of her shoe in the soft, damp earth near a few bushes in one of the love alleys where we stood alone. Finally, encouraged by her silence, I said, "Velichka, I can't sleep through the nights. I only think about you." Upon hearing these words, she looked at me with shy eyes and quietly said, "I feel the same way." When I heard those words, it was as if the earth began to spin around me. I heard her, and at the same time, couldn't believe it was true what she said. I looked at her, dazed, as if sunk in a dream for 20 to 30 seconds, until finally, instinctively, I grabbed and hugged her, and then for a long time passionately kissed her warm lips. That was one of the happiest moments I had ever lived, as it was the first kiss I exchanged with a girl in my life. From that day began a great love, which many would envy. We started meeting every day. We had found a quiet spot next to the love alley, where we went every day and delighted in our mutual love. We went to the cinema always together. When we were taken on Labor Day, whether for picking chestnuts in Belasica or picking cotton in the fields, regardless of the fact that we studied in different classes, Velichka and I were always together. We felt truly happy because our love was mutual, full, without reservation. She completely believed in my feelings so as to become entirely mine. It also happened that both of us cried from love. We used to say, "Only death can part us." But as people say, a lot of good is not so good. Thus our love did not end well. Half a year after our first meeting, we were forced to part ways for an indefinite period, a time which each of us lived in our own way. It was the time when I simultaneously fell in love with both Velichka and Mother Macedonia. I had already made the stamp with the word Macedonia and scattered thousands of copies of that dearest word to me across the town of Petrich and the surrounding area. I believed now there is meaning for a person to live for something. I had dedicated my secret activity to another friend, Tomata. We were already students in the 11th grade, and it was the autumn of 1956. Besides Tomata Ivanov, 3 other students from our class joined our organization. Stojko Georgiev and Vasil Kantadiev, both from Petrich, and Veselin Palushev from the village of Kapotovo, who, even to this day, has not ceased to love Mother Macedonia. Naturally, in my secret activities, I had also devoted my first love, Velichka, who was supposed to carry the flag of the future Macedonian revolution. Such was our youthful enthusiasm and audacity at that time. We swore in the name and something sacred, which we did not yet know what it would be, but which we loved very much. We thought that in just a few nights we would prepare thousands of Macedonians, and with a single decisive blow, unite the three parts of Macedonia, Vardar Macedonia, Pirin Macedonia, and Aegean Macedonia. We began to find like-minded people from the Gotse Delchev High School with the aim of creating a Macedonian youth organization on the territory of the city of Petrich. Until one day something happened, like my first love, I will never forget. On that 26th of November 1956, when for the first time I fell into the hands of state security, after they detained us in front of the entrance of P.K. Yavorov High School, they took us to the district administration of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MIA, in Petrich. The head of the administration at that time was Captain Sharkin, an exceptionally fierce and disgusting scoundrel. Whether because his service was such, or because his appearance was ugly, disgusting, but that bastard, so many times I met him, many times afterwards, I never thought well of him, and he never touched me with a finger. I have met other chiefs like him of higher and lower ranks, but in their gaze I would sense some warmth and even notice a smile. But with this scoundrel, neither one nor the other could be seen. When you are at his disposal, you feel that he looks at you like a snake, ready to devour you with his eyes. By his order, they took me to a room where a large and tall agent was waiting for me. He asked me what my name was, where I was from, and why I was brought to him. I answered that I knew nothing about the case. Then he began to search my pockets, and when he found a crumpled piece of paper with the name Macedonia, he joyfully asked me, "And where did you get this?" "I found it on the street," I replied calmly. He continued searching the pockets of my school shirt, and from the inside pocket, he pulled out a few sheets filled with the word Macedonia. He looked at me victoriously, with eyes gleaming with satisfaction and half-parted lips, and asked me sternly, "Whose papers are these?" I thought for only 10 to 15 seconds about what answer to give. Should I lie or not? If I say they aren't mine, then who put them in my pocket? My thoughts worked rapidly, seeking the best and most convincing way to prove that the papers the investigator was holding in his hands weren't mine. But the investigator shouted, "Whose papers are these?" "Mine," I replied, and looked at the floor of the room. At that moment, my left cheek received a terrifying blow. In broad daylight, sparks flashed before my eyes, but I maintained my composure. I neither cried out nor groaned as if nothing had happened. From the petrification in which I had fallen, I was jolted by his loud voice. "Who did you print these things with?" "Alone," I replied. "And where?" "At home." "Move," he shouted in a commanding voice, and pushed me through the door outside. When we stepped outside, there was already waiting for us a jeep with 2 plainclothes agents ready to go. We sat in the jeep, and in 5 to 6 minutes we were in front of the entrance to my house. We went upstairs, entered the kitchen, and under the stunned gaze of my parents, I showed them the stamp, the ink pad, and a few white squared sheets, which they immediately seized. They searched a few other places in the room, hoping to find something more important, more significant, but after discovering nothing else, they dragged me outside. And my poor mother, petrified with fear, silently shedding tears, sadly saw me off. We got into the jeep and headed in an unknown direction. An hour and a half after we left the town of Petrich, the jeep stopped in front of the entrance to the district directorate of the Ministry of Interior in the town of Blagovevgrad. After we got out of the jeep, the agents handed me over to the elder duty officer, who led me into a tight room, searched me again as new, and then led me down the corridor in the direction to a door upholstered with brown leather. He stopped in front of the door, knocked on the handle, and when he heard a sharp "Yes," he opened it. He saluted in front of a young officer with the words, "Permission, Comrade Lieutenant." "Yes," said the investigator, and the officer left the room. "Sit down," the investigator ordered me, pointing with his hand to the only chair that was near the door. I sat down, and for about a minute we stared at each other without saying a word. After lightly tapping his fingers on the typewriter that was on his desk, the investigator asked me, "What is your name?" "Stojan Nikolov Georgiev." "Where and when were you born?" "On the 18th of March, 1938, in the city of Petrich. Now tell me everything you did regarding the printing of the leaflets. When, with whom, and how long have you been printing this nonsense? I did everything myself. The printing seal, the printed leaflets, and I alone distributed them. You're lying, shouted the lieutenant. No, I replied sharply. Do you know who you're dealing with, boy, mother's son? The investigator screamed, and in 2 leaps he found himself near me. He grabbed me strongly with his right hand by my chin, shouting, You bastard! I'll beat you to a pulp here without blinking. I continued to stay silent, and the lieutenant, unable to control his nerves, began smashing my head against the wall. I remained silent. Once he realized that force wouldn't make me speak, he pressed a button mounted on the desk, and within 5 to 6 seconds, the door opened, and the officer saluted. Permission, Comrade Lieutenant. Take him to the cell, ordered the investigator. The officer led me to some mosaic stairs that descended into a dark cellar, illuminated day and night by electric light. At the end of the cellar, I saw a few doors spaced about 2 meters apart, of about 150 centimeters. From the floor in the middle of each door were attached tins shaped like a cut-in-half lengthwise pear. Until that moment, I hadn't seen such a strange thing and had to think for some time to figure out the purpose of those tins. Later, I understood they were called spying tools. Above each door was a metal plate with the corresponding number written in white paint. We stopped in front of number 12. The officer opened the door, gave me a sign to enter, and afterwards 2 times from the outside, he turned the heavy iron key. When I entered, I saw that the tight cell was layered with a straw mattress covered by a thin, worn-out blue military blanket. On top of it was a pillow with a white cover. In the corner of the cell, behind the door, there was an iron bucket half filled with water. In it, in case of necessity, the prisoner could urinate. The cell was lit day and night by an electric lamp, whose light passed through a dark mesh located on the inside of the small window above the single door. Natural light did not reach the cell. By order of the investigator, the duty officer every day, sometimes even twice a day, led me to interrogation. He tormented me a lot, but I had vowed that at any cost I would not betray the other students involved in our conspiracy. I was deeply convinced that my friend Tomata hadn't revealed anything either. So enduring constant torture, I held out for a full 15 days. The more agonizing the days in the cell became, the more arrogant my investigator grew. But on the 16th day of my imprisonment, when at 6 o'clock in the morning the officer took me to the toilets, up on the wall of the corridor above the sink, I read the following words etched with a hard object: Shan, admit the truth. When on 26 November 1956, at the District Directorate of the Ministry of Interior in Petrich, they separated me from Tomata, I thought they had released him. But I was mistaken. The writing on the wall clearly indicated that he too was in one of the cells, being interrogated. In high school they called me Shan, and who else would be interested in me telling the truth besides Tomata? He must have already confessed everything we knew about the leaflets. The investigator mockingly told him that I was being stubborn as a mule on a bridge and refused to tell the whole truth. So, to put an end to the further abuse I was enduring, Tomata wrote in the toilet for me to tell the truth. I spent enough time thinking about those 2 words written on the wall. I thought of everything until lunch. I pondered what to do, whether to continue remaining silent before the investigator and after the severe tormenting, or to confess the truth as my friend advised from the wall. Finally, I decided to admit that others were involved in our conspiratorial activities. When the investigator called me for questioning after lunch, I told the whole truth. "Ah, you've finally come to your senses," said the investigator, Nikola Mitev. "Why did you stay silent for so long? Or did you think we didn't know what you did with whom, when, and where?" I listened with my head bowed, without reacting to what he was saying. Obviously satisfied with my delayed confession, he pressed the signal button on his desk, and immediately the duty officer entered for reporting. Lead him back to the cell, and in only 50 to 60 seconds, I was once again in my temporary home. 2 days after that, the duty officer took me out of the cell and up some stairs. Instead of stopping on the first floor, where I was usually led for questioning, the officer ordered me to continue up the stairs to the second floor. There all the doors were covered in brown leather. The officer led me to one of them and knocked on the door handle. From inside, a voice was heard that said yes, after which the officer opened the door and reported, "Permission to enter, Comrade Colonel." "Yes," said the host, and the officer left the room. I greeted him with "Good day," after which I sat down on the chair the colonel indicated. The room I was in was quite spacious, around 35 to 36 square meters. One of the walls was entirely glass, while the others had no windows. The wall behind the head of the state security was decorated with a beautiful tapestry, above which hung a portrait of Todor Shivkov. The opposite wall, across from the glass one, was entirely covered with a photo wallpaper depicting a seaside bay with a small black ship in the distance, and, in the foreground on the shore, a beautiful girl casting a fishing rod. I wasn't allowed to turn to see if the wall behind my back was decorated with anything. In the middle of the room, along its length, were two rectangular tables placed side by side, covered with the same beautiful, heavy tablecloths. Around the tables were arranged about 10 chairs, one of which I had sat on, following the silent order of the colonel. The man behind the desk had a fine figure. He looked like, from his slightly greying hair, he appeared to be around 55 years old, with a pleasing countenance. "Well, young man," said the colonel after a pause of about a minute or two, during which time he was reviewing some folder in which, I presumed, was found my small dossier. "What do you think? Isn't it too early for you to be dealing with such big questions, which already for 100 years no one has been able to answer?" He asked, and I remained silent. I didn't know what to reply. Perhaps he was right to speak like that. Probably in his long career he had confronted hundreds like me. Surely he had read many historical and legal documents to draw appropriate conclusions. "Now," said the colonel, "considering your youth, the fact that this is your first time dealing with this complicated Macedonian question, and that you come from a good family, we decided not to send you to court. But if you start talking about that question again, and rest assured we will find out about it, know that you won't pass like this. Be sure that you will end up in prison." After a few more stories of a similar nature, the colonel pressed a button on his desk, and immediately on the door, you could hear knocking. "Come in," said my host, and the door opened. The duty officer who had brought me here about 30 minutes earlier, and the colonel ordered him, "Lead him." "Understood, Comrade Colonel." "Goodbye," I said to the courteous host, and together with the officer I left his office. 2 hours after my conversation with the colonel, the duty officer appeared again in front of my cell. "Outside," he ordered me. "Take your personal belongings." I took the coat that my father had brought me 2 days after my imprisonment, and we went out into the yard. My friend Tomata was already waiting there. As soon as we looked at each other, we started laughing like crazy people. We ourselves didn't know why we were laughing. We laughed like that, maybe for no reason, maybe out of joy that we were together again, free. Maybe we were free, but they didn't leave us alone. The duty officer stood next to us and told us to wait. After a little while, an armed policeman with an automatic gun came to us, and the three of us left toward the train station in Blagovevgrad. There was no need to wait for the train for a long time. By the time Tomata finished one cigarette, the train had already arrived. We boarded the first wagon in the first compartment, which, as I later understood from my own experience, was reserved specifically for prisoners. 2 hours of monotonous clattering, with a 10-minute stop at the General Todorov station, where we transferred from regular cars to narrow-gauge ones. They were satisfied we would arrive successfully at the station in Petrich. From there, the three of us set off on foot towards the Regional Administration Directorate of the Ministry of Interior, Petrich, which is located in the Stamchev building. At the administration, we were admitted with Tomata into 2 different rooms. In the room I was admitted in, waiting for me, was an unknown man with a thin body, not very tall. He had a pale, elongated face, and his head was covered with thinning brown hair. He had the form of a 50-year-old. "Please sit," said the stranger, whom I had never seen before in our not very big town. He said, "Please." And a thin, sarcastic smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. I noticed that he had an incredibly cynical look. His encounters with hundreds, perhaps thousands like me, had formed this man's sense of high self-importance. That, who I later realized, was not a particularly intelligent man. He introduced himself with the surname Ivanov. He said that the party had been generous towards me and had decided not to prosecute me, because what I had done in the past 2 months had been deemed an anti-state act, for which I could have been sentenced to up to 5 years in prison, under the laws of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. In return for the party's generosity, I was to meet with him regularly. We agreed to meet every Wednesday at 7 o'clock in the evening, at a location to be determined at each previous meeting. That was on the 14th December, 1956. I parted ways with Comrade Ivanov and headed towards my childhood home, which I had left on 26th November, 1956. When I went out onto the street, a weight seemed to lift off my shoulders. There's a very specific feeling that a person experiences in the first hours after leaving such a difficult position. While I was imprisoned, I had expected to be sentenced, but the comrades had apparently decided it was more appropriate and smarter not to bring me to trial and to not publicize the case. Those were my assumptions. I'm not sure those were the exact reasons for my release, but the fact was, I was already free and without hindrance could return home. When I arrived at our house, there was great joy. My mother and my father, God rest their souls, they passed away 9 years ago, and my sisters, everyone beamed with joy. They were both crying and laughing. The neighbors gathered. Everyone congratulated me on my happy return. The next day, I was back among my classmates at high school, who were also very happy that I was among them again. Again, I resumed my previous way of living, preparing for school and meeting with friends. The meeting with my friend Velichka was touching. When I returned home, my first job was to inform her that I was free again. I met her friend Vaska, and we agreed to have a meeting for 7 o'clock that same day. At the agreed time, we were already in front of the reading room, me, Lupcho, Vaska, and Velichka. The strong squeezing of my hands signaled the beginning of even more intense embraces, which I had been anticipating for 18 whole days. Great was the joy for both me and Velichka when we were left alone near the hunter's lodge. We couldn't get enough of kissing. When we calmed down from the intoxication of being together again, of being alone again, just the two of us, Velichka told me how hard it had been for her to endure those 18 days of separation. She told me that during that time, it was fashionable to play the song Sick Lies Young Stojan on Radio Skopje, and that whenever the song was playing, she would always cry for me. But now she was crying from joy, feeling at the peak of her happiness. I too admitted my happiness and joy that we were together again because we truly, strongly loved each other. Along with the great joy of being back home, of being with my beloved girl again, I had to meet with Comrade Ivanov every Wednesday, which greatly disturbed me and gave me no peace day or night. I regularly attended the meetings with the secret agent as we had agreed, despite my lack of wish to do so. But about this, I didn't speak of with anyone, not with my parents, not with Tomata, not with Velichka. The struggle I lived alone, like how I alone I had recklessly accepted the conditions to meet secretly with the agent. It's a huge experience to be tormented by something and not be able to share it with anyone. I couldn't sleep for whole nights. I kept thinking, how is it, Stojan, that you set out to fight for the rights of your Macedonian brothers, and now you have to betray them to the enemy? And that is exactly what they expect from me. They advised me to move in different groups, to talk about Macedonia, to provoke my conversation partners by saying that Macedonians have no rights, and then any of those who spoke in defense of Macedonia or the Macedonian people, I had to notify him to the smallest detail. I regularly attended the meetings with Ivanov, but I didn't take any concrete actions to provoke the Macedonians. For 2 months I hadn't given him anything. It seems that to check my loyalty to him, Ivanov instructed me to meet a girl called Lileto Turnova. From her I was supposed to find out whether she was receiving letters from her uncle Dana, who had illegally escaped to the Federal Republic of Germany. 15 days passed since he had given me the specific task, but I still hadn't decided to meet the girl to carry out the investigator's request. I told myself this: if she is a person of state security, I would gladly talk to her. But if the girl is innocent, not involved in the agent's game, how could I betray that fragile creature into their dirty hands? Could I really do that with my uncompromised name and biography? After all, people, ever since I returned from prison, when they met me on the street, they constantly greeted me. They marveled at the courage of that 18-year-old boy to work for the national rights of the Macedonian people. Haven't I always admired the work of the greats, Gotse Delchev, Damai Gruev, Georgi Petrov, Nikola Karev, Yanis Sandansky, and the plethora of Macedonian sons and daughters who died for the liberation of the Macedonian people from Turkish slavery. I have admired the unparalleled feat of Orsay in the Thessaloniki assassinations, those who sat on bombs and died in the name of VMRO and the Macedonian people, and I have fiercely hated the traitors of the people. How could I then become a traitor myself? For whole nights I couldn't sleep from the mistake on my conscience that I had agreed to secretly meet Ivanov, and I vowed to myself that in the morning I would tell him to go away from me and that I would not become a traitor. But in the following meetings, I still couldn't say that to him until the day came when we met in the office of the head of the education department in Petrich. When giving me the task to meet Lileto Turnova, Ivanov gave me a book to read, written by two Soviet colonels whose names I don't know. The title of the book was The Mysterious Traveller. When we entered the office, another comrade from State Security in Petrich, whom I knew as our fellow citizen, was already waiting for us there. His name was Tomas Shopov. After we sat down, Ivanov asked me whether I had read the book, and whether I had met with the girl. I told him that I had read the book, but regarding the girl, I hadn't met her. He also told me that before we start the discussion about the book, I should know that in a month he would be absent from the town of Petrich, and during that time I should meet with Comrade Shopov. Exactly at that very moment, I don't know from where, but the courage came. I told him, "Here is your book, and from now on I will no longer meet with you, nor with Comrade Shopov, nor with anyone from State Security." The comrades stared at me stiff, and began rubbing their eyes as if they were dreaming. It seemed they couldn't seriously take my words. "Don't play jokes," Ivanov said. "I never play jokes," I said. "But are you serious?" "Yes, I am serious," I said firmly. "And whom have you told that you are meeting with us? Who told you to cancel?" "No one. This is my decision, and it is final." "But are you sure about this?" Ivanov asked me. "Do you realize what you are doing? Do you know what will happen to you now? We'll take you back to jail. If you like, send me into space. I can't perform the kind of role that you ask of me. I was not born for that." At these words, the two of them began waving their fists threateningly, and I, most calmly, told them to stay still, because there would be no benefit from violence. If I don't have the wish to do something, no one and nothing in the world is capable of making me do it. "Get out of here, you good-for-nothing," Ivanov shouted. I got up, calmly opened the door without saying a word to add, and went home. This is how my badly thought-out agreement to contact the state security organs ended. At first I thought that since I had a connection with them, I would be more useful to the cause. I would be able to find out some things about the true Macedonians and would have the opportunity to warn them when they were in danger. But after these 2.5 months and many sleepless nights, I came to the realization with the conclusion that to be a Macedonian, a fighter for the rights of your Macedonian brothers, and at the same time to cooperate with state security, is an exceptionally complex and responsible job, for which I felt I was not grown up enough to do. That's how I calmed myself internally. I began to sleep normally without fear, even though the agents were non-stop following me. They even followed me when I went out in the evening to meet my girlfriend, but that was easier to bear than feeling tied with the enemies of the Macedonian people. In a word, I was satisfied with what I am. That is, that I strongly love Macedonia and the Macedonian people. Satisfied that I didn't slip on the path of betrayal, and that I managed to keep my name clean and untainted for my whole life. And to achieve all of this, many deprivations and sufferings awaited me, which I will describe in the following parts of my humble but truthful autobiography. Next chapter, A Ridge of Waves. In the month of May 1957, I completed the 11th grade with good success, a 4, despite not being serious about studying. I was more interested in Macedonia than in studying. We lived miserably in those poor years. My parents couldn't afford to buy me a nice fabric to sew a suit for the graduation night, but that wasn't the most important thing to me. I never got hysterical if my parents didn't want to or couldn't buy me something that I liked. My brother, for example, when he was around 10 to 12 years old, if he liked a pair of shoes and they wouldn't buy them for him, he would immediately lie on his back in the middle of the street and start pounding his heels on the ground, not stopping crying until they bought him the shoes he wanted. Later he changed his character, but such a thing never happened to me. I knew well that my parents were poor and barely made ends meet to feed the 5 children. My father was a caretaker, at the Kocho Mavrodiev school in Petrich for many years, from where he received his modest pension, and my mother worked in agriculture and did labor for wealthier people in Petrich. I am the third child of my parents. I have two sisters older than me, a brother 3 years younger than me, and another little sister, the youngest, born 6 years after him. We lived poorly, but as a close-knit family. We cultivated 10 decares of tobacco to make ends meet, but growing tobacco is very difficult. Until my brother turned 12, I regularly went to dig, plant, and harvest tobacco. We had a field of 3 decares located 6 kilometers from Petrich, near the village of Mitino. When we were harvesting tobacco from that field, I wanted to cry because by noon I would go back and forth 3 times with the donkey loaded with the collected tobacco. I was an excellent student in those years. On my report card, from top to bottom, there was no grade other than an excellent 6. Every summer, the school administration constantly recommended that I go to camp for free to rest, but I could never take advantage of that deserved reward. There was no one to transport the tobacco. When my brother turned 12, I started making bricks at the Prom Combinat in Petrich during the summer break so I could buy new shoes, a shirt and trousers. Those were poor years, up until 1957. During that same summer of 1957, once when I was returning from the brickworks, a neighbor of mine stopped me on the street, but I didn't know any details about his life because I wasn't interested in that. This Grandpa Kika, as we called him in the neighborhood, asked me to talk privately the same day at 8 in the evening. I accepted the invitation, and as we agreed, we met at the Bela Sitsa restaurant where he worked as the manager of the establishment. He told me that he wasn't afraid of me and that he knew I had been mistreated because of the Macedonian issue. He asked me to organize a large group of people who would fight for the unification of the 3 parts of Macedonia, the Vardar, Pirin, and Aegean parts. If it's for Macedonia, I'm ready for anything, I said confidently. We agreed on how to find members for the organization, what kind of people they should be, and what kind of membership forms we should create for new members. These forms were to be written in 2 copies, one to be given to him and the other to be kept by me in the file of our organization. The membership forms had nearly the following content. Today, on 21st July 1957, we, Stamat Alexov Meshkov and Stojan Nikolov Georgiev, gathered according to a previous agreement to review my acceptance as a member of the Macedonian organization that fights for the unification of the 3 parts of Macedonia. I swear that I will work honestly and devotedly for the Macedonian people, and if I harm the good name of the organization and its members in any way, I ask to be punished most severely. In this way, over 3 months I enrolled around 70 members in the organization, for some of whom I did not prepare a membership form. From the Vizdol quarter in our city, I had a very serious, like-minded person. His name was Vangel Urdov. He wasn't very literate, but Macedonia needed serious and loyal young men. I had known him well from the brickyard. By mutual agreement, he started recruiting members in his quarter. He attracted such people as Ivan Karamangilov, Bisto, and others whose names I didn't want to know. Vangel was very insistent on introducing me to a young man born in the village of Vishlane named Boris Popov. He had secondary education and wanted to talk to the organizer. In other words, with me. Without much thought, I accepted Vangel's suggestion one evening, on August 20th, and we met at the Partok restaurant, and Vangel introduced me to the very good young man. We exchanged a few general stories, after which I suggested to Vangel that we leave him alone so we could finish the conversation requested by Popov. Vangel said goodbye to us with wishes for a pleasant conversation. The 2 of us began discussing Macedonia. Popov said he had been dismissed from work because he felt like a Macedonian. He asked how he could feel like a member of our organization. You must first feel like a Macedonian in your heart, and then as a member of our organization, I said. I have felt that way for a long time, but I have no one to work with for the cause, he said. Since you feel like a Macedonian, you will be given the chance to apply as an honest fighter for Macedonian justice, I replied. I pledge myself to Macedonia, said Popov. The tone in which he expressed all this left no doubt in my mind that he was speaking sincerely and that he was ready, like me, to do anything in the name of Macedonia. Wishing him good night, I scheduled a meeting for the next evening at the same time and place. When I went to the park the next evening, he was already waiting there. I thought to myself, a serious young man. I suggested that we go to my home. On the way, we talked about general life matters. I asked him where he was from and what he did. He said he was born in the village of Vishlane and worked in the forestry enterprise in the town of Petrich as a general worker. When a person trusts someone a lot, they eventually find out that their expectations were deceived. So did I. I trusted Vangel a lot. He truly remained loyal to the cause for Macedonia to this day, but I should not have believed his words that he knew that village boy, Boris Popov, very well. For years now, I have berated myself for my irresponsible attitude during my introduction of that scoundrel, who was not a village boy, as Vangel called him, but a village brute, as he eventually turned out to be, for not checking what he did, who his friends were, etc., before allowing him to be close to me. Almost every evening I began to invite him to my home after he himself signed the membership form for our organization. I gave him the opportunity to see that the organization was not large. He read several membership forms from other members and was very pleased that we were not alone in the struggle and that there were others like us with passionate hearts. He promised that he would create small organizations in all the villages of Ograzden, etc. The excitement of my 18 years blinded me and prevented me from interpreting some of his words like passionate hearts, we are not alone in the struggle, and others. I could not understand the difference between what he said about passionate hearts and honest hearts, those which were also needed by Mother Macedonia. Then, 36 days after my detention on October 5, 1957, on a Saturday at the head of the investigative department at the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Blagoevgrad, I was given full opportunity to realize that that young man did not have an honest heart, that he was a traitor to us and to the Macedonian people as a whole. But about that, it will come when it is his turn. I am writing these things here in Skopje, the capital of the Socialist Republic of Macedonia. Today, Saturday, 26th May 1990. 33 years separated me from those beautiful young years, when everything was wonderful despite the poverty. I was happy to work for the cause of Macedonia. I was happy to be a continuer of the work of Gotze Delchev. I found that life had meaning. I said to myself, for Mother Macedonia, a person deserves to live, to suffer, and to die. That was how it was then. I do not believe that anything has changed in me regarding Mother Macedonia, but let us go back far into the past, to 5th October 1957. The previous day, the director of Prom Kombinat, Petrich, Boris Panchev, had given me an envelope with a letter and a small bag with 3 to 4 kilograms of chestnuts, with the words, "You will take them to Comrade Pirin Alexiev, the vice president of the city council in the city of Sandansky. You will convey many greetings from me and tell him that we need to set up a paint shop in the territory of the city of Sandansky." For about 20 days after the brick season ended, I worked in the paint shop at Prom Kombinat in Petrich. It never occurred to me that the director of the plant could be involved in the games of state security. Everything was arranged as it should be, but how would a person know? So, on the 5th October 1957, at 7:30 in the morning, I boarded the bus for Sandansky. After 40 minutes, it stopped at the then city square in front of the restaurant Republic. I got off with the envelope and the bag of chestnuts in my hands and headed towards the 2 men who were standing 5 to 6 meters away from me, who were gazing absent-mindedly at the passengers disembarking. "May I ask you something?" I said as I reached 2 or 3 steps from them. "Yes, of course, please, how can we help you?" asked one of them. "Where can I find Pirin Alexiev, the vice president of the city council?" "You don't know him?" asked the other one naively. "He passed by here just a couple of minutes ago. Please, come with us, we'll find him." The 3 of us headed down the only street in the city, which to this day is still the main one, where almost all the shops are located. They started asking me where I was from, if I had been to Sandansky before, and so on, until we reached a place about 2 minutes away from the bus station. "Here is Comrade Pirin Alexiev," said one of them. pointing towards the entrance, above which was a neatly written sign that read, Regional Directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, City of Sandanski. As soon as I saw the sign, a cold sweat broke out on my back despite the warm weather. So this was who the friendly citizens of Sandanski were. I looked at the sign and wondered what to do until one of the agents finally led me up the stairs to the narrow entrance of the office. There, my old acquaintance was already waiting for me, the head of the investigative department at the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Blagovevgrad, now a captain, Nikola Mitev. For his good service, for uncovering people like me, traitors, the People's Authority promoted such individuals ahead of time to higher ranks, with the clear calculation of increasing their fervor and enthusiasm to uncover the enemies of the Bulgarian people. We respected him, but we also respected ourselves as Macedonians, so the situation was very complicated in those dark days for the Macedonian people. We felt like part of the free Macedonian people living within the People's Republic of Macedonia. We were thrilled by the songs and marches that resonated on radio, Skopje. At that time, there was still no television. When we entered the office, the captain said to me, "Oh, hello, old acquaintance, what brings you here?" "I don't know," I said. "Your people brought me, let them answer." "You are mistaken, dear friend. It's not them, but you who need to say why you are here." Only a deep sigh escaped from my chest and nothing more. I stood there, dazed, staring out the open window, like a beaten, tamed lion locked in its iron cage, with no hope of ever seeing the freedom of the prairie from which it had been forever torn away. I remained silent and thought about what happened without blaming myself in the slightest for the situation I found myself in. Indeed, I did not expect that they would trick me so cunningly into coming to the city of Sandanski, and then, without anyone seeing, arrest me. But the comrades already had 13 years of experience in detecting and disabling people like me, who were labelled as traitors. They had gained a lot of experience, unlike me, who, with my 19 years of experience, could not have imagined that they would catch me in such a way. Captain Mitev was asking me something, but I couldn't even understand the thought behind his question. I was only mechanically answering yes or no. As soon as he realized that I wasn't in a state to answer his questions, the captain ordered the duty officer to take me down to the cellar, where I was carefully searched and locked in a dark, narrow room. I stayed there for about an hour, after which I was taken out, handcuffed, and put in a jeep. After about an hour, the jeep entered a large yard, in front of whose gate a policeman was on duty. I guessed that I had been brought to the Regional Directorate of the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Blagovevgrad. There an officer searched me and led me down the long corridor of the one-story building, along which 20 doors were symmetrically arranged on both sides, at a distance of 2 meters from each other. He stopped in front of cell number 4, opened the door wide and said, "Get in." I crossed the threshold of the door, after which the officer turned the key twice. I was left alone in the middle of this dark room, but on the wooden floor there was a mattress covered with a worn-out army blanket from long use, at one end of which was a pillow with a white pillowcase. Here less than a year had passed since I had escaped from the control of the state security in 1956, and I was already under guard again. But now I was in a new one-story building, not like the previous year, in the cellar. In this building as well, no sign of sunlight entered the rooms. They were illuminated day and night by electric light, which had a destructive effect on the nervous system. But here, in the state security, you had to endure, keep quiet, and avoid conflict with the officers and investigators as much as possible if you wanted to stay healthy and alive. And there was a lot to think about. Many conversations without restraint for those 3 months with people about the problems of Macedonia. Indeed, there were many things to be said about the past, the present, and the future of the much-suffering mother Macedonia and our unfortunate Macedonian people. I had spoken a lot and heard a lot from people about Macedonia. Now I was left alone with myself, and there was nothing else left for me but to recall, one by one, the meetings with different people. Like on a film reel, one by one, various scenes from that unproduced animated film appeared in my memory, scenes I wanted to forget, but I couldn't. From experience, I already knew that the more time I spent in silence and solitude, the more scenes emerged in my mind. And the short animated film, which was brief at first, over time expanded its scope in both quantity and quality, and turned into a fully completed feature-length film. And the people I had talked to, and the lines we exchanged, became clearer and more defined. Thus, all day and all night I thought about everything I had seen and heard, until I was taken by the duty officer to the captain's room. When we entered the room, the officer requested permission to leave the office, and we were left completely alone. We stared at each other silently for 30 to 40 seconds, each absorbed in his own thoughts, until the host broke the uncomfortable silence with the words, "Welcome, old acquaintance. Please sit on that chair." And he pointed to the chair on which I sat without will. "Thank you," I said. "It's time to continue the conversation we started in the city of Sandanski yesterday," the investigator said, with his gaze fixed directly into my eyes. "What is there so much to talk about?" I asked. "Oh, there are many things you need to talk about, my dear," he said. "And what if I don't feel like talking about those things?" I asked, half jokingly, half seriously. "Even if you don't feel like it, we have the means and the ways, and we have plenty of time to make you talk. You need to understand one thing. The more openly you speak, the more sincere you are with us, the better it will be for you. You need to understand this as well. There is no going back, and it's only in your interest to tell us everything, from start to finish, with the smallest details about your life after the liberation in December last year." The investigator spoke convincingly in a friendly manner, without raising his voice, and I just remained silent. "Well," said the captain at last, "aren't you going to start?" "What is there to talk about?" I simply said. "Are we going to go through last year's scenario again?" the captain asked sarcastically. "Don't you understand that, apart from talking, you have no other choice?" I stubbornly kept silent, staring at the Persian carpet, as if I had been brought here to study the rich craftsmanship of the creators of that magnificent human work. But I could feel that the man opposite me was already losing his patience, despite his efforts to be good and patient. A few more minutes passed in the same position, until the captain burst out and lunged at me furiously, shouting hysterically. "You idiot! Are you still messing with me, you little bastard?" he screamed, grabbing me by the throat with both hands, slamming my head against the wall behind me. Finally, after 5 or 6 hits against the wall, I said to my comrade across from me, "What do you want from me?" "Tell me something about your friend Kikata, when he first met you, and what he told you to do." "Ah, that's something else," I said triumphantly, despite being the one who suffered in our little clash. Since I was detained in the city of Sandanski, I knew nothing about the arrest of the other members of our revolutionary organization. Well, revolutionary, because at that time we foresaw the use of force to resolve the Macedonian question. We thought that if we started the struggle in Pirin Macedonia, our free brothers from Vardar, Macedonia would come to our aid. We did not allow ourselves to believe that there, even though they felt and were recognized as Macedonians, many of them had spent years in the prisons of SFR Yugoslavia because they wanted to unite the 3 parts of our divided homeland. But how could one know about that when we have these borders, these barbed wire fences, so closely guarded by Bulgarian border guards? From 1940 until 10th November 1989, Bulgaria was a large prison, a big concentration camp where a person couldn't utter a word, because out of every 3 people, 2 were informants of the state security, as proven by the thousands of trials and thousands of prisoners and detainees, some of whom met their end there. True service to the cause of the Macedonian people, that deeply I trusted him, here in the office of the head of the investigative department, Nikola Mitev. I was again thinking about the words spoken by him and trying to determine who the person was that betrayed us. But I wasn't allowed to remain silent any longer, and I briefly recounted my conversations with Grandpa Kika. I spoke while the captain asked questions and monotonously clacked away on the typewriter. Finally, after about an hour and a half of questioning, I read the record, which was about 3 pages long, after which he made me sign every page of it. After my first interrogation was over, he called the duty officer, who took me back to the narrow cell. Thus began my second journey into uncertainty. Every day, almost every day, the duty officer would take me to the investigator, sometimes twice a day. Questions, thousands of them. He asked me about this, he asked me about that, about a third thing, about a fourth, and so on and so on. I had told quite a bit, but I was also hiding many things. We got to the point that on the 36th day of my imprisonment, the investigator forced me to sign the following statement. I, the undersigned Stojan Nikolov Georgiev, with my signature confirm that, apart from what I have said, there is nothing else. Otherwise, I ask to be severely punished. After I signed the statement, the captain took it and began to read it. He read triumphantly, loudly, smiling from ear to ear. Finishing the reading, he began to laugh hysterically. "What's so funny?" I interrupted angrily. "You'll regret your insolence," the investigator said irritably. "I won't regret it," I replied decisively. At that moment, my interlocutor pulled out a drawer and slammed a folder with application forms on the desk, shouting, "Here, read and tell me who the author is." I took the application forms in my hands, and as soon as I looked, I recognized my own handwriting. I looked at them, looked at the investigator, who was carefully observing my reactions. I looked at the application forms, I looked at my interlocutor, and suddenly I started laughing, just as he had laughed a minute ago. I laughed, and at the same time, tears ran down my cheeks. Up to that moment in my life, I had never been in such a state of shock. I laughed and cried at the same time because now I understood that I had been played. I found out who the real traitor was. I had never suspected that the documents written by me, which I had hidden in the chimney opening of the fireplace, could end up in the hands of the investigator. Only Boris Popov, the much-praised Macedonian from the village of Vishlain, knew where I had hidden them, a man in whom I, to my great regret, had completely trusted. That very naivety of mine now made me laugh and cry at the same time. Those who have not experienced such a moment in their lives can hardly imagine my position. A minute or two later, the investigator said, "Well, what do you say now, my dear?" "Nothing," I replied. "You think we know nothing, that we're wasting our time with you and others like you? No, young man. We know everything about you, about Tomata, Stamat, Vangel, your teacher, Kikata, and everyone else in your organization. We know your pseudonym is Sukarno, and so on. Now tell me, what goals are you pursuing since you set out to create an organization?" "We want you to acknowledge that we are Macedonians." "What kind of Macedonians?" the investigator shouted angrily. "We have all been Bulgarians since time immemorial." "No, comrade investigator, I am not Bulgarian, I am Macedonian." "And how do you know that?" "How do I know?" "I know from my dear mother. Her father, Nako Ivanov, born in the village of Matnitsa in Aegean Macedonia, spent 5 years in prison in Edikule in Thessaloniki because he fought for the freedom of Macedonia. My grandfather Tomo on my father's side was killed in 1912, again for the honor of being Macedonian. That's how I know I am Macedonian." "Well, and how do you see the realization of your ideas, with weapons in hand?" "I believe the Macedonian question can be resolved within the framework of a Balkan federation, as Dimitar Blagoev envisioned its realization in his time. Those are their ideas which cannot be realized. Was Dimitar Blagoev naive when he declared before the National Assembly in Bulgaria on 14th of November 1917, "I am a Macedonian Slav, and the Macedonian people are different from the Bulgarian people"? "Well, that's where Dimitar Blagoev made his fundamental mistake," the investigator said. "And what about Gotse Delchev, Jane Sandansky, and the thousands of fighters who laid down their lives at the altar of Macedonia? Did they also make fundamental mistakes?" I asked. "They considered themselves Bulgarians and fought for the liberation of Macedonia and its unification with Bulgaria," he replied. "That is not true," I said. "They fought against Bulgarian, Serbian, and Greek propaganda with all available means." "Leave history aside now and consider your current situation," he said. "What is there to consider? It's clear. I am here, and the rest depends on you." Not on us, but on you, young man. Last year we told you to stop getting involved with that damned Macedonian issue, but you couldn't appreciate our gesture. Now you're in for trouble. What's written on the forehead does not go on stone, goes the saying, I replied. You're right, the investigator said, and then he pressed a button on his desk. Within seconds the guard appeared, and I was sent back to my solitary cell. Thus, day by day, time passed slowly and painfully for a full 113 days until the investigation was completed, and we appeared before the district court in Blagoevgrad. Here, the chief prosecutor of the trial, which took place on 8th of February 1958, argued that we wanted to overthrow the socialist regime of the People's Republic of Bulgaria and to separate Pirin Macedonia from the territory of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. He requested sentences of 5 to 15 years imprisonment. After listening to the prosecutor, the accused's statements, and the defense, the court handed down the following verdict for me. The Blagoevgrad District Court issued judgment number 142 on 8th February 1958. According to NOHD and pursuant to Article 93, Paragraph 1 of 2 in connection with Article 82 and Article 36 of the Penal Code, sentencing Stojan Nikolov Georgiev to 4 years of imprisonment. He is deprived of his rights under Article 28 of the Penal Code for a duration of 7 years, and items worth 200 leva are confiscated for the benefit of the state. The sentence comes into effect on 17th of April 1958. Kirill T. Ruskin, or Grandpa Kika, was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment. Stamat Meshkov and Toma Ivanov received 1.5 years of imprisonment each, and Vangel Urdov received 2 years. The trial was held behind closed doors. Many friends from the town of Petrich had come, but only the closest relatives of the accused were allowed into the hearing. Then, when I was imprisoned, I was not yet married and had not served in the army. At the trial, my parents, sisters, brothers-in-law, and my brother Ivan were present. After the trial ended, we were allowed a 10-minute meeting, after which we were loaded onto a truck and taken to the central prison in Sofia. There we were placed in a special section, Grandpa Kika in a cell with other prisoners, Vangel and I in one cell with a few other people, and Tomata and Stamat in another cell. On the 20th day after we were placed in the 7th special section, Stamat, Tomata and Vangel were called from their cells and sent to the Stara Zagora district prison. Grandpa Kika and I were transferred to the 5th section, where we started working in the sewing workshop located within the prison grounds. After staying there for 3 months, I stopped working because I did not have time for reading and learning the French language. I was returned to the 7th section, where I spent about 7 months, after which I too was transferred to the Stara Zagora district prison. As soon as I arrived there, the old prisoners, after learning that I was from the town of Petrich, told me that Vangel, Stamat and Tomata had also been there but were now working in the quarry near the village of Kaloyanovets in Stara Zagora. I then asked the administration to be transferred to that quarry. Thus, just a week after my arrival at the Stara Zagora prison, I was transferred to be with my friends and fellow defendants, Tomata, Vangel and Stamat. How happy we were to meet again alive and well, even though we were in prison. There I also met a young man from the village of Chereshnica, Ivan Kuchkudorov, who was also sentenced to 2 years in prison over the Macedonian question, about whom his fellow defendant, Dimitar Terziev, with whom I spent about a month during the investigation in the city of Blagoevgrad, had told me. In the Sofia prison, I also met a young man named Timlyo Zaprev from the town of Gotse Delchev, who had been sentenced 3 times for 3 years in connection with the Macedonian question. There, I also met Ivan Bikov from the village of Samoilovo, sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment over the Macedonian question, and I also met Stanko from the village of Chernitse, Blagoevgrad region, sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment as a member conspirator from the trial in the Forestry Technical School in the town of Bansko, also over the Macedonian question. In the Stara Zagora prison, I also met Kitan from the village of Gara Pirin, sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment in 1949 in a very large trial against 149 defendants over the Macedonian question. Here, I also met many other young men from Pirin Macedonia who were spending part of their life's journey on the struggle of Macedonia. Philosophically speaking, what does prison represent? Prison is a place for isolation where convicts serve their sentences, deprivation of freedom. And freedom is a great thing. Even if you have millions, nothing can replace that natural gift, freedom. As stated in the Declaration of Human Rights from 1948, people are born free and equal in dignity and rights, regardless of race, skin color, political views, social status, education, gender, language, religion, and so on. Regardless of which territory you live in, whether it is free or under a protectorate, freedom is a fundamental right of every person, provided that they respect that right for all other people. And in prison, precisely that sacred human right is missing. Here, a person has countless obligations, but has the right only to work and rest within the confines of the prison, as far as it pertains to political prisoners. Here, life is grey, monotonous, and a bit more bearable than the life one leads when under investigation. I had become so accustomed to prison that sometimes I thought I was born in it, and that another world, a world different from that of a prisoner, did not exist. Like that, due to such thoughts and such a psychological state, prison does not weigh heavily on a person. For example, I never lacked time in prison, even though we were woken up so early, at 6 in the morning. The whole day a person is occupied. I constantly read artistic literature. Sometimes I drew, none of which remains as a memento. In prison, they conduct what is called a search every 3 months, and everything drawn or written is taken away. Here I drew The Girl with a Fan by Paul Gauguin, but it was taken from me. In the Stara Zagora prison during the spring of 1959, for example, I translated the history of the ancient Macedonians from the French History of Ancient Peoples, but it was confiscated, and I could not take it outside the prison walls. Here, in the Stara Zagora prison, I wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister and First Secretary of the Bulgarian Communist Party, Todor Zhivkov, in which, among other things, it said, "Until when will you play politics with Macedonia and the Macedonian people? You, Mr. Zhivkov, were the first to greet the prime ministers of the newly liberated states of Cuba, Ghana, and Cameroon at the time. But what have you done about Macedonia? You weep for a foreign grave, Mr. President." And so on. Because of that letter, after about 3 months, I was called by the prison inspector, Colonel Tonev. When I entered his office, I greeted him with, "Good day." "Good," said the cold, unfamiliar inspector, without inviting me to sit in one of the 5 or 6 chairs in the room. From the expression on his furrowed brow, I sensed that I would be having a conversation with an unpleasant person. "What is your name?" he asked. "Since you called me, you must already know my name," I replied. "You are obliged to answer," he snapped. "Stojan Nikolov Georgiev." "Where are you from?" "I assume you know that too." "Boy, you need to understand that I am the one asking questions and you need to answer." "From the town of Petrich," I said calmly. "Why don't you want to sign the consent form for socialist competition?" "Because only free people can participate in competitions. If I were free, I would sign, but here, no. You are deliberately introducing competition among the mining shafts to see who agrees with your politics here in the prison. I cannot accept as normal everything you are doing to us prisoners." "And what are we doing to the prisoners?" the inspector demanded angrily. "You beat and mistreat them." "For what are you sentenced?" "For the Macedonian question. You are very young, yet you want to solve big issues. I only wanted to understand them, that's why I am here." "How many years are you sentenced to?" 4. "They sentenced you only for a few years." "Probably those who sentenced me were not as simple as you," I retorted angrily. But these words of mine were too much for the inspector to endure. He called the duty officer who had been listening to our verbal clash from the waiting room. When the door opened, the colonel ordered, "Take this idiot to the punishment cell." The duty officer grabbed me by the arm and dragged me into the corridor. There he tried to hit me with his fist, but I successfully dodged with my arms. When he saw that he couldn't easily handle me, he said sharply, "Get outside." I let my arms fall and took a step to go outside. Taking advantage of my lowered arms, the old thug swiftly struck me in the stomach. From his strong blow, I bent over at the waist. Then I felt an even stronger hit to the neck, and after 1 or 2 seconds, a kick to the backside. I barely managed to restrain myself from hitting him back, but I reconsidered. It was more reasonable to endure, because a few days earlier, one of our prisoners had been brutally beaten and had to be put in sheepskin afterward. All of this made me endure. I also thought that if I retaliated against the bloodthirsty thug, the other guards who were in the adjacent room would kill me. So after this dialogue of ours at the end of July 1959, I was held in the punishment cell twice for 14 days each time, which I will never forget for anything in the world. The punishment cell was located in the underground of the camp kitchen. It was a room measuring 2 by 2 by 2 meters, or a total of 8 cubic meters of air, with a wooden floor. The only opening in this tiny room was a door 190 centimeters by 80 centimeters without any window. Since only faint sunlight entered the basement, the punishment cell was as dark as a tomb. They also left us a bucket for natural needs, which we emptied only once a day, in the morning. When they shoved us into the punishment cell, they locked the door with a padlock. 5 of us were shut in that room, one of whom was an older, large man. His name was Kolyo. He was from one of the villages near Stara Zagora. The man sat day and night, as there was no place to stretch out his legs or lie down. The rest of us younger ones, Milche, Ivan Koślensky, Pesho, and I, spent most of the time standing. The weather outside was very hot, and inside the punishment cell, it was stifling. To allow a bit of cleaner air to enter for breathing, I put one of the rags in the crack of the door and waved a summer shirt to push out the foul, stagnant air and let in some fresh air from the rest of the room outside the punishment cell. But the guards noticed this cleverness of mine and put on 2 more padlocks. The walls were completely covered along their entire length, and we breathed rapidly like dogs gasping for air in the extreme heat. In the morning, at lunch and in the evening when the guards opened the door to give us soup and bread, they fled as if burned because the unclean, stuffy air suffocated them. They couldn't stand at the door's entrance for even 1 or 2 minutes, while we endured a full 14 days and nights. As a protest against the poor conditions we were placed in the punishment cell, the 4 of us younger prisoners without Kolyo refused to take food for a whole 6 days, demanding that the district attorney come to see the conditions in which the punished prisoners lived. But neither the prosecutor nor the devil came. The guards said it wasn't a fascist era for us to demand a visit from the prosecutor. So, hungry, thirsty, and sleepless, we endured the first 14 days, after which we were let out for lunch, and in the evening, I and other boys were shoved back into the punishment cell. I had to endure another 14 unbearable days and nights. Thanks to my young body, I managed to survive the second stint in the punishment cell. But when on the 28th day, I was finally released to the free prisoners, camp inmates, this is what happened to me. After being released from the punishment cell, I went straight to the summer bath located in the camp area, well guarded by armed police officers with automatic rifles and specially trained dogs. After my bath, my 2 best friends, Vasko Zafirov and Kiro Tushev-Dinev, both Macedonians, prepared bread with salami for me. As I sat down, I took the first bite of the bread and a bit of the salami and began to chew. When I started to swallow the chewed food, I felt a warmth starting to descend down my esophagus. After a few seconds, I felt the warmth spreading through all parts of my emaciated body and began to shiver like a frozen little gypsy child. My friends asked why I was trembling, and my jaw began to chatter from excitement. That moment in the prison is something I will never forget. And so day by day passed, ugly and without anything memorable, until finally, 30th of January 1961, arrived, when I was released from the prison in Stara Zagora. I had heard a belief. When a person exits from prison, they shouldn't look back, as they might fall back into it. I never believed such things and turned back to that Bulgarian Bastille, where the intellectual conscience of Bulgaria and Macedonia spent its best years. There I spent 3.5 of my youngest years, when I should have completed my higher education. when I should have been loving and loved, when I should have served as a soldier, and so on. How much I wanted to play sports, how much I wanted that leather football. But my fate was different, and I had to continue along my chosen path. Perhaps that's why I so bravely looked back at the prison as I left, to see what it looked like from the outside. On 31st of January at around 9 o'clock in the morning, I had already arrived in Petrich. Near our street, one of our neighbours, Aunt Maria, recognized me. "Is that you, Stojan?" she asked. "Yes, Aunt Maria, it's me. Haven't you forgotten me?" "I haven't, son, I haven't." She came out and hugged me as if I were her own son. "Run home because your mother can't wait to see you." Indeed, when I arrived home, my parents were already waiting for me. It was also St. Athanasius Day and people were not at work. When my mother saw me, she started crying from joy. "Don't cry now, Mother, I'm here," I told her. "The hard part is over and a better life awaits." "Yes, yes," said my Aunt Olga, hugging me as well. Soon the neighbours came, and we joyfully celebrated my return from prison. In the summer, I started making bricks again. In the fall, I decided to study, to pursue French philology, my old dream. But I needed someone to give me a recommendation that I was a party member, or a good Komsomol member, and I was neither, which meant I couldn't even submit my documents. I had to find solace in being alive and well, knowing that there were thousands like me without a higher education. It's still not easy for me to this day. I feel unhappy that I don't have a higher education, knowing how many incompetent, mediocre people are now directors of schools, companies, and so on. So time passed monotonously with work and concerns for survival. All my good classmates were at university, some were already married, and I, like a fool, associated with boys 4 or 5 years younger than me. In the winter, around 20th of November 1961, one evening while walking through Petrich's Jesme with my friend Vangel, I saw Ancheta, the sister of my former intimate friend Velichka, walking with her friends Rosa and Nonka, who had just finished 11th grade. All three were increasingly beautiful. The first time we passed by each other, and the second time I decided to ask Ancheta for a private conversation, but she did not want to part with her friends. 10 months after my return to Petrich, I often saw Ancheta, but we did not greet each other. She knew that I was a former friend of her older sister, but we passed each other as strangers. I did not feel any need for a conversation with her. I knew she was a bit cold in character, and therefore I never showed interest in stopping her for a chat. But that evening I insisted. "For the first time, Ancheta, since I returned from prison, I decided to talk to you, and you don't want to," I said. "And what should we talk about?" she asked. "Just, I want to ask you about this and that." "Oh, you realized that my sister came and that's why you want to talk now." "How so she came?" I asked. "Yes, she came and has been sitting by the window all day to see if you pass by us." "But is it true what you're saying?" I asked. "True, of course." "Then there is no more to talk about," I said, and we moved away from my friend. That same evening, around 9, I whistled with our signal, and within 2 minutes she was already in my arms. "Hello, welcome," she said. "Hello," I said, and a long, too long kiss spoke of the desire to see each other again after a long separation. "How did you know that I arrived today?" she asked. "How, from your sister, Ancheta?" And I recounted the brief exchange between me and her sister, and she laughed heartily. "Don't you know she's a bit wild?" she said. "That's why I passed by her so many times in these 10 months since I returned from prison. But now something in me drove me. It simply said, 'Stop her, stop her.' And I gathered the courage to stop her, but it was not necessary to talk more with her, since she told me you are here." "Instinctively you felt that I am here." "Yes, there is something like that, and maybe it is a coincidence," I said. "It is not a coincidence at all. All day I've been thinking about you and waiting for you to pass by us. These are things still unexplained by science, but people probably possess them, as they say. Imagine a dog grab a stick." "Maybe you're right," I said and hugged her again. After that, we went to my place and resumed our beautiful life just like before the prison. During the month of February, the labourers, soldiers who spent their entire service working from the city and surrounding areas were gathered, but I was not included. One day, I met Stojan Georgiev, an operational worker at the regional department of the Ministry of Interior in Petrich, and I said to him, "The labourers in Petrich have been gathered, but I still haven't been taken. If I don't go to the army this year, you should know. Next year I will go to prison, but not as a soldier. This is my categorical decision." He listened to me carefully and said he would do everything possible for me. So on April 22, 1962, I was called to Blagoevgrad, to the district department of the Labour Army, and was enlisted in the military unit number 1640 in Petrich, commanded by Georgi Yanakiev. I was given the opportunity to meet with Velichka almost every evening without problems, as she had left her husband in Sofia. However, during one of our meetings, she told me that her neighbour had said my mother did not want a divorced woman like she was as a daughter-in-law. It hurt me a lot because my modest mother shouldn't speak like that about people, and the next morning I gave her a stern warning. "I will live with her, and you have no right to talk like that with people." She didn't say anything to me, and maybe there was no need, because in May of the same year, 1962, I was transferred for a while to a military unit in the village of Mitino, in the Petrich district. One day a few labourers and I went to swim in the Struma River. The river was full, and I bet with a boy named Sergei that we would swim across the swollen, turbulent river. After a while, when I had already conquered the strong current, I turned around to see Sergei, but he was not there. From the shore they began to wave at me to return, and I decided to change my swimming direction. I started to fight against the strong current of the river with all my might. The harder I paddled, the further away the water carried me, and I saw that the river was widening downstream like a sea. It seemed I had lost self-confidence due to the isolation in the turbulent, foamy waters of the river, and I began to call for help. Soon I had no strength left to swim. I tried to touch the riverbed, but I couldn't reach it, so with my last remaining strength, I swam against the current toward the shore, which was about 40 meters away. At that moment, I noticed that 3 or 4 labourers had jumped into the river towards me. I again tried to touch the riverbed to rest. I finally stepped onto the sand, but the water was still up to my nose and was pulling me down. I started swimming again, draining my last reserves of energy, and the only thought that crossed my mind in that critical moment was that the waves would swallow me, that my end had come. But fortunately, I found myself in shallower water, where I was able to stand, and the water was now up to my chest. I rested for a few seconds, and then swam toward the shore, which was only 15 meters away. When I grabbed a root on the bank, 2 boys who had come to help me were already there. I lived and suffered. Otherwise, if the boys hadn't arrived, I would have long since gone to St. Peter's, to the other world. I survived, but the entire commotion was noticed by the unit commander, and the next day he called me out in front of the squad to give me a lecture. "Stojan Georgiev, 3 steps forward," commanded Captain Yanakiev sternly. "I hear you, comrade captain," I said, and stepped forward 3 steps. "Do you see this, comrade soldiers? Do you see this beauty? Yesterday he nearly drowned and would have made a stain on our unit. He deserves the strictest punishment. He deserves to be sent to prison." He issued several orders in that vein with an arrogant tone. Finally, he turned to me with the words, "You filthy Macedonian, you don't deserve to breathe the air of Bulgaria." At the last remark, I couldn't stand it, and replied, "Comrade Commander, this is Macedonia, and you don't deserve to breathe its air." "March 5 days in prison. I'll have you court-martialed, you filthy creature," shouted the commander at me. I was imprisoned for 5 days. As I later learned, he indeed tried to court-martial me, but my parents had gone to Kolyo Chutok, my father's cousin, and he was connected with Captain Yanakiev. Thus, family ties helped me avoid prison again, but I was transferred from Unit number 1640 in Petrich and sent to serve in Unit number 3, 216 in the area of Ilinka River, which is 3 kilometers from the Rila monastery. I had to part with the city of Petrich and my first love, Velichka. When I returned to Petrich on vacation after 3 months, Velichka had already remarried a divorced man from Sofia who lived with his 5-year-old child. I was supposed to spend 2 winters working at the Ilinska river site. There we were building a road to the mountaineering hut called Macedonia, and I worked as a miner. I drilled into the rocks with a pneumatic drill and steel bits, and we filled the holes with explosives to clear the path. During the summer of 1963, we were stationed at a military camp in the area known as Turkish Peace. One day, an artist from the battalion in Blagovevgrad came to write slogans. He was a kind-hearted young man, and I asked him to paint a seascape mountain landscape from a magazine he carried with him. He agreed, and in about 2.5 hours, on a plywood board measuring 180 by 140 centimeters, I painted a truly classic picture. The artist asked if I had attended an art academy because he was very impressed with the painting. We hung it on one of the walls in the unit's mess hall and everyone admired it. By the end of 1963, we were reassigned to the city of Bobov Dol. On 22nd April 1964, I completed my military service and returned home. A week later, I visited my former site, Ilinska River, but the unit had already been disbanded and my painting was gone. Thus, my only artistic creation with oil paints decorated someone else's home. It was a beautiful painting, part of the sea with a boat and a fisherman in the foreground, a white seagull flying above, and a green mountainous landscape on the sides. It was not meant to be mine. Soon my father told me that my former math teacher, Gerasim Popov, wanted to see me. I had been his pride in mathematics during high school. The next day, when I went to his school, Kocho Mavrolich, he greeted me with these words, "Stojan, like me, you are an apolitical communist. I think you feel very repressed in your soul after prison. I am now an inspector of mathematics at the Department of Education in Blagovevgrad. Therefore, if you want, go to the village of Dolena. There you will teach mathematics to the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades at the primary school. I believe you will handle the task excellently." I was reluctant to go, explaining that I was compromised and had served time in prison, but he insisted. He assured me that I have the strength to be useful to the students from that mountain village, and listed many other things in my favor. Finally, I agreed, and by the end of April, I was already an uncertified teacher in the village of Dolane. 1 week after starting work, I conducted a test in algebra for the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades, and what a dreadful result I got. In the 5th grade, out of 29 students, 22 received failing grades, a 2. In the 6th grade, out of 22 students, 17 received failing grades, and in the 7th grade, out of 19 students, 14 received failing grades. So much work had been neglected. The former teacher, the wife of the school principal, who was on maternity leave, had not properly conducted the lessons. The students didn't know the basics of algebra. They didn't know how to find the difference between squares, add and divide fractions, and so on. Since the bus from Petrich to Dolane only ran on Monday and Saturday, I rented a room. Every afternoon, since the children were in a boarding school, I conducted additional lessons to help them grasp the basic rules of algebra and geometry. After 2 months of persistent effort on my part, and from the students, no one in the 5th and 6th grades had to repeat the year due to mathematics. Only in the 7th grade did one girl, who had failing grades in 4 other subjects, have to repeat the year. And I passed one boy who didn't really deserve a 3rd, or passing grade, who eventually finished school for professional drivers. Thus, in June, I completed my first and last practice in this authoritative profession. Finally, the school principal, Alexander Panev, wrote me a well-deserved commendation as a teacher. In the autumn of 1964, I enrolled as an external student at the Civil Engineering Technical School Hristo Botev in Sofia. In the spring of 1965, I worked as a painter. That was when I met my current wife, Maria, who was studying with my youngest sister, Vida, at the clothing school in Petrich. That same year, in October, we got married, and on 25th December, our first daughter was born, whom we named after my mother, Dimitrina. 4 years later, in 1969, we had our second daughter, whom we named after my wife's mother, Elena. At the Technical School, I studied the speciality geodesy and cartography and quickly mastered the geodetic material. Even before I graduated, in the summer of 1966, I conducted a controlled geodetic survey, the levelling of the DSP orangeries area in Petrich, under engineer Zdravev. The result was excellent. On the 4-kilometre route, I came out of one levelling survey and finally, I rejoined it with a minimal difference of 12 millimetres. I was an excellent surveyor, and I took charge of the entire low-rise construction of a 320 decare project. I had 110 workers, to whom I measured and provided levels every day for laying concrete slabs on drainage channels and other tasks. They assigned me an assistant, a colleague who had graduated from the technical school 3 years earlier. There, on that first project of mine, I met the chief of our MA, Sofia Dano-Donev, who later hired me to manage the reconstruction of the Petrich, Marikostinovo Road and the Kula-Sandansky Highway. I measured all day long with 2 assistants from the village of Marino Pole. But it was on this project that I first met my future co-defendant, Stojan Markilov. That was in 1968. Stojan came to work on my project as an assistant bulldozer operator on the tank bulldozers that were pushing the excavated earth along the routes of the new roads being built. In April 1969, I left RMO Sofia and began working as a construction technician at a general construction company in Petrich. There I took on one of the largest construction projects in the city, the expansion of the conservation factory. After 7 months, the company's director asked me to go finish the primary school in the village of Kurst, in the Petrich region. But I refused because it would have required me to leave the company. I started working as an investor on projects in the city of Petrich, financed by the Directorate of Investments in Blagoevgrad. Since I hadn't completed the construction and architecture department, the director pressured me to enroll part-time in this speciality role as well. I attended the first session and passed 2 exams, but then I realized that I needed to stop because even if I completed it, I wouldn't become an engineer. I left the technical school and also left the investor service to work as a technical supervisor on the correction of the Strumeshnica River, the section between the villages of Kavrakirovo and Purvomai. About 50 workers were employed there, and we transported them to and from the site by trucks. They made protective woven structures along the route of the bulldozers. Stones, stakes, and other construction materials were brought to the site by dump trucks and cargo trucks that I rented from Auto Stop Anstvo in Petrich. To count the trips made by the drivers, I had placed a very serious man from the village of Belasica named Andon Radev, who did his job conscientiously. One morning in the spring of 1970, instead of taking my MZ-150 motorcycle, I set off for the site by bus. When I got off in the village Purvomai at the same time, Stojan Markilov got off at the village and wanted to talk to me. He told me that they had already formed a Macedonian organization. I simply told him that everyone who got involved with the Macedonian question inevitably had their head smashed in. I just didn't want to talk to him about it, because I still didn't trust him. Up until then, he hadn't yet been involved in the Macedonian movement. At that time, I had people I was secretly meeting with, but I didn't talk to anyone about it. So, Stojan and I parted ways without me giving any significance to the words he said about their organization. Over the next month and a half, Stojan kept waiting for me at the bus station in Petrich, where I got off in the evenings after work. He kept telling me he was unemployed, that he had 4 children, and so on. One day, when he stopped me again, I told him, "Come to the bus station tomorrow at 7 in the morning. You'll work on my project." "What will I be doing?" he asked with interest. "Whatever the others are doing, you'll do too. We'll figure something out." That evening, we parted ways. The next morning, he was already waiting at the bus station at 7. We waited a little until the transport vehicle arrived with the workers from the village of Topolnica. The 2 of us got on and arrived at the construction site. There, after the workers had breakfast, they all went to their respective tasks. Stojan, Andon the counter and I were left unoccupied. "Listen, Doncho," I said briefly, "you and Stojan will count the truck trips. One day you, the next day him. To avoid drawing attention and to prevent people from reacting to the fact that I'm paying 2 counters, you'll also do some other work. I believe it won't be too much for you to stick willow branches into the sand near the water, which will later take root. Besides that, you'll use a rake to even out any edges left behind by the bulldozers. I won't set a quota for you. You can work as much as you want, just so we don't give people a reason to complain about paying 2 counters. As you say, so it will be, Comrade Chief, Doncho said. I think we've understood each other. I turned to Sokrat and continued towards the workers who were driving in the willow stakes and weaving fences around them, filling them with crushed stone. After work, Sokrat, who was otherwise witty and entertaining, often invited me over to watch television. During those visits, he introduced me to Ivan Timchev from the village of Kamene, Ilya Kochev from the same village, and Pavle from Petrich, along with Todor Chikandalov from Petrich, and others from whom I understood that there truly was some newly formed group. I met with Ivan Timchev more frequently because he was more literate than the others, and the 2 of us began drafting the constitution and the program for the organization. In the meantime, they had stolen a typewriter from the forestry enterprise in the town of Sandansky. Ilya Kochev's son, who worked there, and Ivan Timchev with his motorcycle, had successfully completed that task, and we now had such a valuable instrument for a clandestine organization. On that machine, I wrote a call to the Macedonian people in which we called upon them to fight for the protection of our national rights as Macedonians. The exact text of that call can be found in the State Security Archive in Blagovevgrad. I opposed Sokrat, telling him that we shouldn't be making membership forms for people to join the organization, because if they fell into the hands of state security, it would be undeniable proof of their membership in our organization. But he assured me that the membership forms were hidden in a safe place. A significant weakness of Sokrat was that, in those dark years, he would talk to anyone about our organization without being selective, which caused many people to seek help from state security to avoid trouble later on. For example, the medical technician Kirill Boyazev, who merely addressed an envelope in French to our organization, was later expelled from the ranks of the Communist Party and reassigned to a rural area when the state security authorities found out. By day, we went together to work on the construction site, and by night, we worked on the Macedonian question at Sokrat's place. One evening, Sokrat said to me, "Stojan, I spoke with Kiro, the bulldozer operator from the village of Drangovo, but he doesn't want to join the organization." "Sokrat," I told him, "you need to be more cautious, more careful with people, because do you think you're inviting them to a wedding? Only talk about our issues with good, trusted people." A month later, Sokrat told me, "Stojan Kiro from the village of Drangovo has agreed to work for Macedonia." "Look, Sokrat, he only responded after he reported your previous conversation to the state security authorities." "That can't be," he replied, offended. "Kiro is a serious guy. I've known him for a long time. Remember my word," and I told him, "Soon you'll find out that I was right." And indeed, after the investigation was later completed, when I read the entire file with the materials on our case, the first report to the state security was submitted by the same Kiro from Drangovo. When they then gathered us into a shared cell in the Sofia prison, I said to Sokrat, "Did you read Sokrat, who filed the first report to state security about our organization?" "Yes," he said, "you were right." I also told all 8 of us who were arrested then that if they gathered us all in one place before the process against us even began, it meant that among us 8, 1 or 2 were state security informants, and I was right about that too. Even Timchev and Todor Chikandalov had given in during the investigation and became their informants. That was at the beginning of 1974. But let me go back a bit before that. In February 1972, I left the correction of the Strumeshnitsa River project and started working as a professional driver of a light car in the taxi service in Petrich. I thought that this way I would have more time to talk with different people about the Macedonian issue. Indeed, I met many people, and in an unmistakable way, I could tell who felt like a Macedonian and who felt like a Bulgarian. I found many young men ready to take on the difficult path of the struggle for Macedonia, But since I didn't make any membership forms with them, none of them ended up on the radar of the state security. From my own experience, I knew that if a secret is discussed by more than 2 people at the same time, it is no longer a secret. That's why when I talked about clandestine matters, I only did so one-on-one. As a driver, I barely lasted 10 months, not because the work was hard. On the contrary. While I was behind the wheel, I didn't feel like I was working. It felt more like taking a trip. Something else made me leave the job. I was a substitute for 6 drivers. Many of them, when they had a day off, instead of leaving me the car to work with, would take it in for repairs on that very day. So I only went to work 2 or 3 days a week. When Ivan Denev and Nikola Zlatnov took their breaks, that's when I was guaranteed work. Thus, at the end of December 1972, I submitted a request to the director of DAP, Petrich, and was released under Article 29, with the letter A, by mutual consent. In the meantime, I had found a job at Komunalno Stopanstvo in Petrich, working as a technician for construction painters. During my conversation with the director of the new company, Ivan Karavanov, he agreed to give me a position with a salary of 130 leva per month if I provided him with a work booklet showing more than 10 years of work experience. I accepted this condition. I started working and was soon temporarily sent to the town of Razlog, where our painters were working on the large national project Cellulose and Cardboard Plant, or simply CCP. There I met many good Macedonian colleagues, Ivan Mikushin, Georgi Pankov and Veselin Palyushev. With the latter, back in 1956, we had distributed leaflets in the town of Petrich. When I returned to Petrich at the end of the month, the company director had issued me a salary of 120 leva. Because of this, I went to his office. I knocked on the door, and after hearing yes, I entered and asked, "Can we talk?" "Yes," he said. "Comrade Director, you promised me a salary of 130 leva if I had over 10 years of work experience. I provided you with a work booklet showing such experience. Why then did you sign off on a salary of 120 leva?" "But you were imprisoned for the Macedonian question," the director said without ceremony. "What does prison have to do with my work? I paid my dues. Don't I have the right to live, to work now? Don't I have a family too?" "You do, but if I had known that you were imprisoned for the Macedonian question, I wouldn't have hired you in my company," he said. "I won't bother you with my presence any longer, Comrade Director. Here I will now write a request to leave my job," I sharply replied. I grabbed a sheet of paper and immediately wrote my request. So after just 1 month of work, I had to start looking for a job again. There. That's the fate of everyone who has been imprisoned for the Macedonian question. I was forced to look for work even in Razlog. There I started working as a technical manager of a project that had not yet begun, the transshipment station for the CCP, located at the railway station in the town of Simitli. For this project, with the workers I found from Petrich, we travelled by bus every working day for 9 months, from Petrich to Simitli and back. This continued until one day, on 5th of November 1973, I was detained by the state security organs. They arrested me in the area of the Cellulose and Cardboard Plant, CCP, in Razlog, and took me by jeep to the regional directorate of the Ministry of Interior in the town. Here I was once again surprised by the repulsive figure of the head of the regional directorate, Shakin, who was well known from the events of 1956 to 1957 in the town of Petrich. Naturally, the first thing the state security people did was to search me and throw me into a cell. It's not worth recounting my conversation with Shakin, so I spent the night there, and early the next day I was taken to state security in Blagovevgrad. The officer on duty searched me again, drawing up the corresponding report. Only after that did he lead me to one of the cells, where I stayed until noon. After lunch they put handcuffs on me, twisted behind my back, and put me in a Volga car along with 2 civilian agents, and we headed to the 4th Regional Directorate of the Ministry of Interior in Sofia. The duty officer there searched me just like the others in Razlog and Blagovevgrad, with the difference that here I was stripped completely naked. Moreover, the officer forced me to turn my back to him, after which I had to bend over so he could check if I had hidden a knife in my backside. During this last operation, I felt infinitely humiliated, as if I were not a human but some kind of animal. I don't know if in any other civilized country such a lowly act is performed on a prisoner's dignity, because no matter what he is still a human being. And as Maxim Gorky said, "Man, it sounds proud." However, considering the 5th-century Turkish yoke over the Bulgarian people, it should not surprise us that such Asiatic practices were used by the duty officers. If the Bulgarians couldn't adopt something more worthy from their oppressor, they certainly embraced barbarity and crudeness to the fullest extent. Or perhaps it runs in their blood. An hour after my confinement in the prison cell, I was taken out for interrogation by the investigator, Lieutenant Georgy Petkov. Before they took me out of the cell, one of the 2 accompanying militiamen pressed the alarm button, activating rotating signal lights in all the corridors, similar to those on police cars. No one was allowed to exit the adjacent rooms during that signal, and during the 3-month stay at the 4th Regional Department of the Ministry of Interior in Sofia, I saw no one other than my investigator. It felt as if I were in a Gestapo interrogation division. Such a grim atmosphere reigned in that ominous place. For the 3rd time, I encountered my former investigator, Nikola Mitev, this time 16 years later. He had risen to the rank of colonel and was now the head of the department. His hair, now greyed by years and worries, was still well preserved. He greeted me with a smile, friendly despite our past, which had been marked by uncivilized, improper encounters. But that was long ago. We had both somewhat forgotten the details, but the situation now demanded mutual respect. When he entered, he stood for a moment, surprised, to look at his old client. "Welcome, Stojan, how are you?" He greeted me politely. "I'm well," I replied. "Thank you for your concern." And again, Stojan, still with that damned Macedonian question. "What can be done, Comrade Mitev? Someone has to be here." "It's not exactly that way, but that's your business. Be more straightforward with your investigator, Comrade Lieutenant Petkov, because the case requires it. After all, you're familiar with these things," said the head of the department, and then he left the room. As soon as we were alone, Lieutenant Petkov began the mandatory questions about my name, place of birth, place of residence, place of work, and so on. He asked, I answered, and the typewriter clattered monotonously under his quick fingers. He was proficient with the machine and well versed in investigative terminology. It was no accident that he was in charge of the entire investigation. Many people had been detained. Some investigators even traveled to the towns down there in Macedonia, questioning witnesses. Those who were not seriously involved in the organization were questioned in their places of residence and then released. In Sofia, they conducted investigations against 15 people, 7 of whom were eventually released. Only 8 of us remained, of whom 3 were sentenced to 5 years in prison, 2 to 4 years, 1 to 3 years, 1 to 2 years, and 1 to 1 year. Another 2 were interned for 3 years each in Delioman. It's not worth describing the thousands of questions and answers, the sleepless nights filled with thoughts about the trial and my family. I was already married, with 2 small children, and so I endured the investigation and imprisonment with great difficulty, mainly because of them. When I saw my children at the trial in Blagovevgrad, for the first time after 7 months of being imprisoned, it was very hard for me. The little one couldn't recognize me. My wife said to the child, "Go to your father for a bit." But the child turned its head away. It was afraid of me. I was shaved in prison clothes and the child couldn't recognize me. But before I was arrested, the child loved playing with me. It loved brushing my thick hair. 2 years before that, when the little one couldn't even run yet, on Sundays when I didn't go to work, wherever I went in the neighborhood, the 2 children were to me like a bell on a lamb. They were so attached to me that they didn't want to stay even a minute with their mother when I was home. I would always jokingly ask Lench, "How much do you love me, Daddy? From the earth to the moon and from the sky to the sun?" The poor child always answered like that, as if sensing that maybe we would be separated for a long time. That's why our meeting, after 7 months during the trial, was very emotional. My older daughter, already a first grader, recognized me immediately and cried uncontrollably. But the little one didn't recognize me and didn't want to come to me. So, after 7 months, I had to reflect on why the children had to be without their father for several years. Were they any different from other children who rejoiced in the presence of their fathers? From 1957 to 1961, when I served my first prison sentence, I was a young man. It was hard for me because of my parents, my sisters, and my brother. But I told myself, they are all at home. There was someone to be with my parents. But now with these 2 little children, I felt very guilty. I didn't want to part from them, but fate. Not everything depends on a person. Sometimes there are stronger forces than us, and whether we like it or not, we have to live the life set for us. Some say life is what you make of it. Maybe there's some truth to that. But when the current takes you, nothing depends on you anymore. You struggle to pull yourself aside, but the current carries you further inside, further away into the uncertainty. 16 years after those unfortunate moments, I was once again in the whirlpool of an even stronger, more powerful, and larger current, once again facing the same dilemma. Do I have the strength to slip out of this dizzying torrent, or should I let it carry me into the unknown? 2 currents carried me, and I never tried to escape from that flow. I think that even now it's the same. I'm staying here now at the Yugo Tutun Bitola resort in the city of Ohrid, beside the sparkling Ohrid Lake. I am writing these bitter lines about the life of such an unhappy, yet happy, Pirin Macedonian. Life, as the next part of this novel dedicated to Macedonia will show. But let me return to the end of the trial. The trial was not particularly memorable or spectacular, except that we were charged with spreading defamatory propaganda, that is, endangering the security and territorial integrity of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. This is a standard accusation for anyone who feels like a Macedonian and thinks about Macedonia. According to the laws of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, he is a traitor and works for the secession of territories. From this perspective, much more could be written, but I don't think it's necessary. The most important thing is that after the sentences were pronounced by the district court in Blagoevgrad, we were forcibly removed from the political landscape of Pirin Macedonia. Our enemies rejoiced, while our close ones cried. After the trial and meeting with our closest ones, we were loaded onto a monkey wagon and taken to the Sofia prison. Here in the 7th Division, we were placed in different cells. 2 weeks later, those with shorter sentences were taken to work in the prison kitchen, with the exception of Sokrat and me. After a while, I was sent to the Stara Zagora district prison. My sentence was under number 5 or 4 June 1974, according to the NOHD under Article 109, Paragraph 1, and Article 108 and Articles 20 and 54 of the Criminal Code, 4 years of imprisonment with a strict regime. This meant that only once every 2 months I had the right to receive a letter, a package, and 8 leva or 1 meeting with my loved ones. For the second time, I arrived at the Stara Zagora Bastille, which besides the high 8-meter wall was surrounded by 4 more rows of barbed wire, one of which was with crooked posts similar to those at the state border. I stayed here for about 2 months without work. After that, I was transferred to work in the carpentry workshop as a painter of furniture. I quickly got into the work and only needed 3 hours to meet the daily norm. I used the remaining work time for reading books and studying Greek. When I was first in the Stara Zagora prison, I learned French and Turkish, and now I devoted my time to Greek because I knew it would be useful in my future activities to learn the language of the enemy, who, like the Bulgarians, refuses to recognize the Macedonian language, nation, and people. Here in prison, I met 2 of my future friends and comrades in the struggle for our survival as Macedonians in the territories of Pirin Macedonia, Kirill Panchev and Yordan Kostandinov Ivanov. The latter was sentenced to 3 years in prison, and later, in 1980, due to active involvement in the Macedonian question, he fell into prison again for another 2 years. The difficulty in Stara Zagora prison was that it was very far from Petrich, and when my wife had to come for a visit with 1 or both of our children, the journey was exhausting. It seemed to me that while I was in prison, it was harder on my wife who worked shifts in a sewing factory. She had to take care of the children and send me packages or come for visits. I have not kept any documents from the first prison term, but from the second all the letters I sent to my wife she managed to preserve, so we can occasionally reminisce about those difficult years. After some time, once his wife had recovered, Sokrat Markilov was brought to Stara Zagora prison. He did not work, but we had the opportunity to talk several times at the yard, the place for daily walks. Upon my arrival here, I met two young boys, Angel and Stanimir, from the village of Gabrinai near Petrich, located under the peak Tumba of the Belasica mountain, where the borders of Bulgaria, Greece, and Yugoslavia intersect, borders that tear apart the living body of Mother Macedonia. These 17-year-olds had fled to Greece, but later Stanimir returned alone to his native village, while Angel stayed in SFR Yugoslavia, traveling illegally to West Germany, and was later returned to Bulgaria. Stanimir was sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, and Angel to 12 years. For fleeing, I was never sentenced to more than 5 years of imprisonment, but these young boys were also charged with espionage. Stanimir served 6.5 years in prison, and Angel 8.5 because neither of them received any pardon, but nothing was ever given to true Macedonians. In the fall of 1979, the head of the state security from Petrich, Captain Injov, arrived at the Stara Zagora prisons. I was summoned to the office of the head of the political section of the prison, Major Nikolov. There I found Injov, who greeted me and asked to discuss the court trial that had concluded 6 months earlier. "Stojan, we also need to talk about the other participants in your conspiracy," said Injov. "It's all over, Mr. Injov," I replied. "No, Stojan. There are still participants in the case. We know who they are, but we want to hear it from you. I don't know any such people. What about the technician Russia, a citizen of SFR Yugoslavia? Only you and one other person had contact with her." "That's a lie, Mr. Injov, and you won't succeed. I won't allow myself to be provoked. Look, Stojan, we know what you took from her and what you discussed. Now we're waiting to hear it from you. Besides, if you're honest, we can immediately release you from prison. I guarantee that. Thank you for your generosity, Mr. Injov, but I have mentally prepared myself to serve the 4 years of imprisonment." "Don't be so quick with your answer, Stojan. Go back to your cell now. Think carefully about my offer. We'll talk again tomorrow morning," he said, after which I was led out of Major Nikolov's office. I went away and thought long about the case. I didn't think about his offer to be released early from prison. I thought about who might have given that information to state security, and 6 months after we were sentenced. Back then, even before we were arrested, I had met with Russia, my colleague, under false pretenses. We talked often about Macedonia, but I neither suggested she join the organization, nor did it have anything to do with our conspiratorial activities. Only Sokrat knew about my conversations with her. But if he had told them something about her, the case would have been clarified during the investigation. And at that time, no word was said about Russia. This means someone else must have informed them. But who could it be? That was what troubled me all night. The next morning, I was again taken to Major Nikolov's office. We talked with Captain Injov again, but I didn't tell him anything. I also couldn't understand where they got that information about my conversations with Russia. What was more important was that I didn't get tempted by the offer of early release at the price of betraying others to achieve my own success. I didn't want freedom obtained by imprisoning other people, and I served the second sentence standing, without complaints, without apathy. I worked and read, and I even lacked time to play chess. I never complained. I never thought about home. Regardless of what was left at home, with my wife and the 2 small children who needed oil for the winter, from my protection and from other needs. But even if I was upset, how could I help her from prison? I only helped her with the 30 leva I sent to my wife each month, since I was already working and receiving a monthly 20% of my earnings, or an average of 40 leva. Through letters and visits, I maintained contact with my family while serving that 4-year prison sentence. In early spring of 1976, I was already free. Interestingly, after each release from prison, I was asked to cooperate with state security. This time Colonel Atanas Maznikov made the offer, but I categorically refused. "I didn't become a spy at 19, so why now?" I said. "It's not spying, it's patriotism." "And this time you'll do without my patriotism," I retorted. "Well, if someone comes to you now and tells you there is a Macedonian organization, will you come and inform us about it?" "No," I said, "I will never do that." "You'll end up in prison again," said Masnikov. "That depends only on me." With these words, I stood up and went home. We had the conversation in the presence of Kosta Kirkov, my high school classmate, now a major in state security in Petrich. 2.5 months after my release from prison, there was no work in my specialty for me. Finally, 2 of my friends, Doncho and Shivko Takov, asked Georgy Zahov, director of non-standard equipment, in Petrich, to hire me as a mechanic. I applied and took the specialty exam, passing for the 5th working grade. I worked there for 4 months, until a friend informed me that the Yavor company in Petrich needed a construction technician because their previous one had gone into the army. I agreed that, according to Article 64, I would work at that company for 2 years until after their technician returned. Under my supervision, we built a prefabricated warehouse, a monolithic one, and a hall 200 meters long and 24 meters wide, the main part of the future prison. When their technician returned, the building was already ready for covering. I was once again left without work in my field and worked as a general laborer for 8 months. 4 months later, I began working as an assembler at the Domostroitelny Kombinat in Blagovevgrad, which manufactured the panel blocks in the Poliani neighborhood near the Biljana factory. Soon one of the colleagues left the project, and I took on the role of technical manager at that enterprise. I spent my longest work period here, which was 5 years. Eventually, I worked as an investors controller at the School for Social Nutrition in Petrich. Before I went to the Human Dimensions Conference in Copenhagen, Denmark, my relationship with the school director, Angel Yankulski, who was born in the village of my great-grandfather Deli Georgi, was not excellent. He constantly invited me for coffee and enjoyed talking with me. But when I returned from Copenhagen, the first thing he did was express his dissatisfaction with me as a manager. He said, "Either you focus on your work or on Macedonia." I immediately wrote a resignation letter because Macedonia is everything to me. Thus, from 1st August 1990, I have worked only for Macedonia. Next chapter, to Copenhagen and Back. The plenum of the Bulgarian Communist Party, held on 10th November 1989, marked the beginning of tumultuous changes on Bulgaria's political scene. Sooner or later, the end had to come to the tyranny of the despotic leader Todor Zhivkov. An end also had to come to the experiments with various forms of socialism, developed, advanced, mature, real, and who knows what else, that were implemented over 35 years, a period long enough to bring Bulgaria to its current absurd state. 12 billion in foreign debt to the West, empty stores, total corruption in all areas of life, and the introduction of a coupon-based supply system, all in peacetime. Those are the achievements of Todor Zhivkov and his thousands of collaborators. His actions regarding demographic changes also reached remarkable heights. He decided to outdo even Hitler in his efforts to create a pure Bulgarian nation. First, he renamed Macedonians as Bulgarians, then he turned gypsies into Bulgarians, followed by changing the names of the Pomaks after a wave of victims and years of imprisonment, and finally, he renamed ethnic Turks as Islamized Bulgarians. All of this led to the collapse of Zhivkov's regime. I said to Nikola Delev, an active communist from Petrich and husband of my first cousin, "Kolyo, this is where Todor Zhivkov will finally break his neck." "Why?" the man asked in surprise. "Because the Turks are not defenseless gypsies, not Pomaks, not Macedonians. Behind the Turks stands a great state that will not allow experiments with their compatriots in Bulgaria." "What compatriots? They are not Turks but Islamized Bulgarians," he sharply replied. "What Islamized Bulgarians are you talking about? These are pure Turks. For years, the history textbooks of Bulgaria always stated that Turks, Bulgarians, Gypsies, Vlachs and others lived in Bulgaria. And now suddenly they've all disappeared, just as the Macedonians began disappearing during the censuses in 1956 and 1965. The man didn't like my conversation, especially when I mentioned the Macedonians. After all, he was one of those active fighters since he received a special pension. We often talked about the renaming of the Turks. Finally, as the saying goes, the day of reckoning came on 10th November 1989. In that same year, Todor Zhivkov had to be removed from Bulgaria's political stage. The entire myth of the Islamization of Bulgaria, about which I often asked Kolyo, collapsed. Where did your Islamized Bulgarians disappear to? The poor man had nothing to say. What could he say when, due to that foolish policy, Bulgaria was placed in complete isolation from the Islamic world? On the 10th November, awakened the dormant consciousness of the Bulgarian nation. Dozens of parties, movements and organizations were created. There was a sense that something new was coming, that some kind of democracy was on the way. But what kind, what it would look like, and for whom, the future would reveal. Amid these emerging political changes, we Macedonians also decided that our long-awaited day had come, that we could finally freely declare ourselves as Macedonians, that the Bulgarian government would recognize us as Macedonians and would allow us to have our own organization. In Sofia, Georgi Solunsky founded the VMRO, Independent, Ilinden, and in Pirin Macedonia, we established several organizations. These were 1. The Committee for the Protection of Macedonian Rights in Pirin Macedonia, 2. The Cultural and Educational Society Jane Sandanski in the village of Mikrevo, and 3. The Committee of the Repressed on the Macedonian Question. My old friend Jordan Kostandinov from Sandanski and I were interested in finding out what kind of person Georgi Solunsky was. So one day in February we went to Sofia. We met with him and went to his home. He lived in an attic room, small and with 2 wooden beds, quite poor. But he had a telephone. The room was scattered with many books, all with Macedonian content. He also had the Macedonian flag with the lion. We talked with him all day, and when Jordan and I finally set off for Pirin Macedonia, we were convinced that he was a true Macedonian and not a Verhovist supremacist. The meeting with Georgi Solunsky was on a Saturday. The day before, I had gone to the Cultural and Educational Society Gotse Delchev, located right next to the Macedonia cinema. There I saw an old man putting up a notice about a meeting on the display case. I asked the man to tell me what kind of people were members of their society, and he said, "We are Bulgarians from Macedonia. And what about you?" "I am a Macedonian. And where are you from?" "From Petrich in Pirin, Macedonia," I replied. "And what kind of man is this Georgi Solunsky?" "Forget about him," the man said. "He's for an autonomous Macedonia." I thanked the old man and headed to my younger daughter's apartment, who lived in Sofia, near the Garina Stadium, satisfied with the words of the old Verhovist supremacist about Georgi Solunsky. From my daughter's apartment, around 9 in the evening, I arranged to meet with Solunsky the next day. After that, I had several opportunities to speak with Georgi Solunsky about our organizational problems. It was his initiative to submit a petition to the National Assembly of the People's Republic of Bulgaria for the recognition of the rights of the Macedonian minority in Bulgaria. The evening when the news on Bulgarian television announced that VMRO, Independent, Ilinden, would submit a petition to the National Assembly, I was thrilled and spent the whole night thinking about what might happen the next morning in the center of Sofia. When I arrived in front of the National Palace of Culture at around 10 in the morning, I found many of our supporters there. But close to us, supporters of the supremacist movement gathered with the intention of obstructing the submission of the petition. The Verhovist supremacists had written many anti-Macedonian slogans, and if it weren't for the neutral Bulgarian police, we likely would have clashed with them right there. This is evidenced by the television footage from RT Skopje. At around 11 in the morning, we set off towards the National Assembly. Throughout the journey, we were followed by whistles and shouts from the Verhovist supremacists, but we calmly and with dignity reached the Bulgarian parliament, chanting the word sacred to all of us, Macedonia, which for many of us was the meaning and essence of our lives. In the following days, thanks to the television footage from TV Skopje, the entire Macedonian people from the 3 parts of Macedonia and around the world had the opportunity to witness this historic event. On 14th April 1990, a Saturday around 8 in the morning, in the city of Sandanski, The leaders of the aforementioned organizations operating in the Pirin part of Macedonia gathered to coordinate our further joint struggle. We thought a lot about what name to give the new joint organization we were forming. After much discussion, we decided on the authoritative name United Macedonian Organization, OMO Ilinden. We also discussed the constitution of our organization. Finally, we adopted the constitution and program of OMO Ilinden. The constitution of the United Macedonian Organization, Ilinden, in the Pirin part of Macedonia. Article 1. OMO Ilinden aims to unite all Macedonians, citizens of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, on a cultural basis. Article 2. In accordance with Article 19 of the Helsinki Declaration on Human Rights and Article 52 of the Constitution of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, OMO Ilinden will strive for the recognition of the rights of the Macedonian minority in Bulgaria. Article 3. OMO Ilinden will be formed on a territorial principle. A. OMO Ilinden will establish its own sections in every village. B. Each section will be led by a local governing body. C. The entire activity of OMO Ilinden will be managed by a coordinating committee based in the city of Blagoevgrad. Article 4. Any person, regardless of gender, language, religion, party affiliation or social status, who is not compromised by dishonest or immoral acts before society, can become a member of the organization. Article 5. Members are admitted by submitting an application to the local section. Article 6. Any member of the organization who violates the Constitution will be expelled from it. Article 7. OMO Ilinden is a voluntary organization. Any member may leave at their own will. Article 8. OMO Ilinden does not seek to violate the territorial integrity of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. Article 9. The organization will not resort to violent, brutal, inhumane or illegal actions to achieve its goals. Article 10. OMO Ilinden opposes all forms of separatism, nationalism, chauvinism, assimilation, and genocide. Article 11. OMO Ilinden will support the right of self-determination for every individual, regardless of their ethnic and religious affiliation. Article 12. Members of OMO Ilinden are obligated to help each other as brothers. Article 13. The organization will provide moral and material support to its members who have fallen into hardship, those who are repressed or unjustly dismissed from work. Article 14. OMO Ilinden will be represented to the outside world by its governing body, the President, the Secretary, and the spokesperson. Article 15. The Coordinating Council consists of 11 members, including President, Vice President, Secretary, Chief Coordinator, and Spokesperson. Article 16. The Coordinating Council is elected by public voting for a period of 1 year. Article 17. OMO Ilinden will hold its Congress every year on August 2nd, Ilinden, the day when the uprising in Macedonia was launched in 1903. Article 18. The highest governing body overseeing all activities of OMO Ilinden is the Congress, to which the Coordinating Council is accountable for its work. The Congress elects the Coordinating Council and determines the position of each of its members. Article 19. OMO Ilinden will be financed through membership fees, voluntary contributions, and other types of funds, in accordance with the laws of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. Article 20. OMO Ilinden will have its own open bank account in the People's Republic of Bulgaria. The 11-point program of the United Macedonian Organization, Ilinden. 1. Promoting Macedonian history and culture before the global public and among ourselves. 2. Protecting Macedonian historical heritage, culture, and traditions through propaganda, educational and scholarly activities. 3. Providing a free platform for expressing alternative views regarding the socio-political development of Macedonia. 4. Maintaining close ties with organized Macedonians living abroad. 5. collaborating with all organizations, associations, unions, political parties, state institutions, governments, and others, ready for an equal dialogue. 6. Officially commemorating events and personalities. 7. Conducting independent propaganda and publishing activities with free access to all mass media outlets. 8. Maintaining connections with all cultural institutions and inviting speakers to share knowledge about the historical past of the Macedonian people. 9. Creating its own emblem and seal. 10. Working towards lifting the country out of the economic, spiritual, environmental and social crisis. 11. Maintaining relationships with all religious sects within the country and abroad. This is the constitution and program of the United Macedonian Organization, Ilinden. There is no call for violating the territorial integrity of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, so why are we labeled as separatists, traitors, servants of Macedonism, emissaries of Skopje, paid agents of Belgrade, and more? Shortly after the founding of OMO Ilinden, we held the most significant event of 1990, the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the tragic death of Jane Sandanski, whom the people rightfully called the Pirin Tsar, and the Turkish Sultan referred to as Sandan Pasha. The Macedonian liberation movement has known no greater protector of the autonomy of VMRO than Jane Sandanski. For 18 years, this true son of Mother Macedonia never laid down his arms and never ceased fighting for an autonomous Macedonia, and against foreign propaganda, Bulgarian, Serbian, and Greek. This displeased the Balkan governments, but especially the Bulgarian court. Several attempts were made to assassinate this great Macedonian, both in Thessaloniki and Sofia, all orchestrated by paid assassins of the Sofia court. Finally, on 22nd April 1915, the enemies of Macedonia rejoiced. In the dense forests of the Pirin Mountains, deep in the protective woods, after a difficult and uneven battle in an ambush with numerous mercenaries, Jane Sandanski, the son of the village of Vlahi and the Pirin Mountains, was mortally wounded. The entire Macedonian population of Pirin, in a sign of filial love and deep respect, arranged a grand funeral for him at the Rojan monastery, beside the church he himself had built. Similarly, as a sign of immeasurable respect and deep reverence for the work of the immortal son of Mother Macedonia, we, the members and sympathizers of the United Macedonian Organization Ilinden, prepared and held this magnificent commemoration. We had to overcome many obstacles and prohibitions, enduring great physical and mental strain, to show the world that Jane Sandanski has followers in the Pirin region of Macedonia and that the Macedonian nation and people exist in Bulgaria. The official Bulgarian authorities banned the commemoration organized by OMO Ilinden for 22nd April, but they allowed the Verhovists, pro-Bulgarian activists, to organize a similar celebration a day earlier, on 21st April. They provided free buses from Petrich, Gocedelchev and Sofia, all with the sole purpose of making their celebration massive. However, despite their efforts, bringing in singers, various musical groups, even the Nevrokop Bishop Pimen, they failed to gather even 1,000 people. Descendants of those who brutally murdered that beloved child of the Pirin Mountains 75 years ago came to pay their respects. What an irony of fate! They came to shed crocodile tears, these enemies of the Macedonian people. But the Macedonian people live in Pirin, they are alive and they know whom to trust. This is why, on 22nd April 1990, despite the authorities banning the previously arranged buses from Petrich, Sandanski, Blagovevgrad, Mikrevo, Kresna, etc., 10,000 grateful Macedonians gathered at the Rojan monastery. The participants were filled with such enthusiasm. Those who found a way to come witnessed firsthand what kind of organization OMO Ilinden is, and heard with their own ears what it stands for and what it seeks. Our non-partisan United Macedonian Organization Ilinden fights with determination. Despite facing great risks and challenges, our brave boys from Blagoevgrad and Sandanski built a magnificent platform that captivated the thousands of supporters of OMO Ilinden. However, just before the celebration was set to begin, as several members of the Coordinating Council of OMO Ilinden were already gathered on the stage discussing the agenda, The prosecutor of the town of Sandanski approached us and asked, "Who among you is Stojan Georgiev?" "I am," I said without hesitation. "And who are you? And what do you want?" "I am the prosecutor of the Sandanski municipality. Are you aware that your celebration has been banned?" "No," I replied. "Didn't we inform you by letter that today, 22nd of April 1990, we will hold a celebration here at the Rozhen Monastery in honor of the 75th anniversary of the tragic death of Yanni Sandanski?" "Yes, we received your letter and responded that your celebration is not approved." "We did not receive such a response," I said, "and that was the absolute truth. Nevertheless, we inform you that its holding is prohibited." "And do you see this multitude of people?" I responded broadly. "They have come here to hear what we have to say, not you, Mr. Prosecutor. You should know that you are taking full responsibility for the consequences of this." The prosecutor confidently delivered his final words. "Yes, I will take full responsibility," I declared convincingly and sharply. At these words, the prosecutor turned and slowly descended from the stage of the first true Macedonian commemoration of the proud Pirin Tsar. All around, hundreds of plainclothes and uniformed agents of the Ministry of Interior, stunned by the bravery of the Ilindenites, waited to see and hear what would happen. 5 reports were read about the life and work of the legendary Jan Sandanski, the man who, with the Miss Stone affair, compelled the entire world to speak of Macedonia at the beginning of the 20th century. For 2 full hours, the speakers, greeted with thunderous applause from the large crowd, spoke of the historical injustice of Europe, which in 1913 divided Macedonia into 3 parts. I read a report on the contemporary stance of Bulgarian political parties regarding the Macedonian issue, which was later published in the magazine 21, Skopje, under the title A Voice from Proud Pirin. Finally, thank God, we witnessed a conscientious rally of the BCP, Bulgarian Communist Party, and SDS, Union of Democratic Forces, on 10th November 1989 at the Macedonia Square in Blagoevgrad. At last, a unity between the otherwise mutually exclusive parties. We are yet to see their inflamed passions, angry and fierce, especially since the SDS threatens that the Bulgarian stage could see a repeat of the Romanian Timișoara, chanting "Down with BCP, BCP, Mafia, kill," and so on. Meanwhile, the communists say, "We conquered it with blood, we'll give it up with blood." Painfully familiar, due to the recent past of our unfortunate Balkan people. A party can only come to power through a coup, only at the cost of shedding brotherly blood. And almost all coups were carried out by hired assassins, and the hired assassins, naturally, were found among the Macedonian immigrants in Bulgaria. But that is another topic. The issue at hand is the unity of the contradictions between BCP and SDS. They build this unity on a possible common idea, greater Bulgarian chauvinism. Only one same, centuries-old cherished dream of reaching the 3 seas, the Black, the White, Aegean, and the Adriatic, can unite the BCP and SDS. Only that illusory dream can unite these mutually exclusive rivals. Only this senseless dream can calm their satanic fury towards one another. What a magnificent theme for a talented artist, to paint for future generations the demonic struggle of these giants over a piece of land called Macedonia. That Macedonia, about which tons of ink have been spilled and rivers of fresh young blood have flowed. That Macedonia which does not have its own history. That Macedonia on whose territory, at the cost of thousands of lives, the first republic in the Balkans was declared, the Krushevo Republic. The same Macedonia that gave birth to and raised such giants of the national revolution as Goce Delchev, Dame Gruyev, Yanni Sandanski, and others. The same Macedonia on whose territory all the Balkan wars and tragedies unfolded. The same Macedonia that gave the world the most emigrants at the beginning of the 20th century. That Macedonia and that Macedonian people whom the politicians have been toying with since 1912, and even today by Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece. That same Macedonia whose fate no one can yet predict. That Macedonia, divided among Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece, a land whose sons and daughters have played and continue to play the role of experimental guinea pigs in these mentioned countries. Depending on where they live, they are called Bulgarians, Greeks, or Serbs. What an absurdity in these so-called democratic and lawful states, which signed the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1946. Is there another nation in the world more unfortunate than the Macedonian, or another country divided into 3 parts? Why can't some people understand that Pirin, Vardar and Aegean Macedonia are not zoos under the patronage of Bulgaria, Serbia and Greece, and that Macedonians are not experimental guinea pigs to be labelled as they please regardless of the will of the Macedonians? In the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, for the comfort and encouragement of all our Macedonian brothers and sisters, the Socialist Republic of Macedonia was created, where one can peacefully and without fear say, "I am Macedonian." In the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, the Macedonian language is spoken, which in Bulgaria is interpreted as a language full of Serbianisms. Perhaps some words should be removed from this language, like strajkovi, strikes, sliki, pictures, and others that are incomprehensible to us, the Macedonians from Pirin Macedonia. But that is the smallest problem. What is more important is that they have their own language, music, the best and most melodic in the Balkans and more. The situation of Macedonians in Greece is entirely different. There, it is said, they are not allowed to speak their mother tongue. And in Bulgaria, under this Shivkovist dynasty, the situation of Macedonians is very delicate and contradictory. Unlike during the time of Georgi Dimitrov, when the ideas of Delchev were realized in Pirin Macedonia, and Macedonians began learning the Macedonian language in schools during the time of the semi-intelligent Todor Zhivkov in 1965, Macedonians voluntarily registered as Bulgarians by nationality. What an absurdity! And now, after 10th November 1989, the most responsible members of the government and the SDS claim that there are no Macedonians in Bulgaria. The same is claimed by representatives of the discussion club Vardar and the Union of Macedonian Cultural and Educational Societies, Sofia. These clubs and unions are created with the permission of the official authorities, to the detriment of the Macedonian people. We, the continuators of the work of Gotse Delchev, Dam Gruyev and Jane Sandansky, declare: nobody has the right to speak on behalf of the Macedonian people, neither we nor they. Those great Bulgarian chauvinists protect their cause under conditions that are fundamentally different from those of the autonomists. The Verhovists have a club near the Macedonia cinema in Sofia, a true ministry with a paid president, secretary, associates, and a policeman in the lobby to guard them. But does anyone ask us, the thousands of repressed Macedonians, autonomists, of whom hundreds have passed through the camps and prisons of socialist Bulgaria, being incarcerated because our greatest crime is feeling Macedonian? Does anyone ask how we endured in those camps and prisons? Does anyone know how many mothers, fathers, wives and children were left in tears over these 40 years of people's rule? Does anyone know? If someone wants to understand the true situation in Pirin Macedonia, let them take a look at the safes of the state security in Blagovevgrad. There, they will find the files of hundreds, maybe even thousands of Macedonians convicted for crimes for which no one is prosecuted in civilized countries. It's sad, truly sad, for a legal state that Bulgaria claims to be. Even sadder is the fact that Macedonians are not experimental guinea pigs, but a people with a glorious past, a people worthy of respect, a people who want to build their present and future together with the peoples of Bulgaria, Greece and Yugoslavia. If this alternative were understood by the peoples of the Balkan countries, Macedonia would cease to be a stage for bloody dramas and the apple of discord forever, and everyone would benefit from that. The peoples of the Balkan states would step into the 21st century as civilized European nations building a common European home. Only a decade remains until the green light on the path to that home, years of trial and great hope, when we can finally shout from the proud Pirin, "Brothers Bulgarians, brothers Yugoslavs, brothers Greeks, we the Macedonians love you and want to live in peace with you and all the peoples of the world. Let us shout with the words of the immortal Gotse Delchev, I understand my own only as a field for cultural competition among peoples. Town of Petrich, 14th of April 1990. The 22nd April was a great holiday for the members and supporters of OMO Ilinden, as well as for the tens of thousands of present Macedonians. 2 television crews filmed this colossal event in the Pirin region, the Bulgarian crew and the team from TV Skopje. Thanks to the filmed footage, both the enemies and the friends of OMO Ilinden were able to directly witness the statements of our organization. And today, when people here in SR Macedonia watch the Royan epic, tears of sadness and joy stream down their faces because the Macedonians from the Pirin part of Macedonia are not lost, despite the years of persistent denationalization efforts by the Bulgarian authorities. About 70 to 80 people, citizens of Socialist Republic of Macedonia, managed to come and had the great fortune to enjoy the proud atmosphere that hovered over the Royan monastery, and they left with a sense of true happiness because the Macedonian consciousness among the brothers from Pirin is not asleep, that many of the thousands present at the celebration wept when talking about Mother Macedonia and her difficult fate. Today, when we talk about the celebration at the Royan monastery, here is how one of my friends from the Socialist Republic of Macedonia described it. What I saw on 22nd April 1990 at the Royan monastery cannot be described in words. One had to be present to understand what happened that day. It was a Pirin epic. It will be remembered for many years and will remind future generations of what this United Macedonian organization, Ilinden, has done. The few present from SR Macedonia rejoiced like children because their brothers from Pirin are alive. Macedonia is alive, and the Macedonian name will not perish. 12 days later, the commemoration of the 87th anniversary of the heroic death of the greatest of the great heroes, the giant of the Macedonian people, the unforgettable Gotse Delchev, was to take place. In Blagoevgrad, on 4th May 1990, about 100 members of OMO Ilinden gathered to light candles and lay fresh flowers at the monument of Gotse Delchev, which is located in the center of the city, Macedonia Square. Here too, the Verhovist supremacists acted arrogantly and violently, shouting traitors, Titoists, servants of Skopje, and other uncivilized cries from their anti-Macedonian arsenal. At one of the meetings of the Coordinating Council of OMO Ilinden, a delegation of 3 members was appointed to. On 3rd of May 1990, we departed for the commemorative event, marking the 87th anniversary of Gotse Delchev's death in Skopje. So, on that day, we left for Macedonia, Theodosius Popov, a member of the Coordinating Council, Pavel Ivanov, a member of OMO Ilinden, and I. We travelled to Zlatarevo in my car, with my wife accompanying us to return the car, as it was arranged for our friends from the Yugoslav side of the border to wait for us. We passed through the Bulgarian customs without problems. They inspected our luggage and let us proceed to Macedonia. With the car that was waiting for us at the Macedonian customs, we went straight to Skopje, where we were accommodated in a hotel. On 4th May at around 10 in the morning, we attended the laying of flowers at the grave of the well-recognized leader of Macedonia, Gotse Delchev. I was invited to say a few words on behalf of the United Macedonian organization, Ilinden. For the first time, I spoke before such a large crowd, and naturally I was nervous. I stated that after Alexander the Great, Macedonia had no greater, brighter, and more desired figure than Gotse Delchev. His name and deeds, like a crimson dawn, will forever shine over Pirin and illuminate the 3 parts of Macedonia. I also spoke a few words about our current struggle in the Pirin part of Macedonia under very difficult conditions. I was interrupted several times by loud applause. The people were very pleased since there were representatives of our organization at this significant event. In the afternoon, we went to TV Skopje, where Theodosius read the constitution and program of our organization. We also met with journalists and historians at the Institute for National History of Macedonia. Our time in Skopje was very good. On the 5th of May, our friends took us back to the border. The Bulgarian border authorities confiscated everything. both the books and the video cassette of the Stojan manifestation that the director of RTV Skopje had given me, which has not been returned to this day. On Saturday, in the city of Sandanski, the Coordinating Council of OMO Ilinden held a meeting. After a lively debate, the attending members gave a very good assessment of our appearance in SR Macedonia over the past 3 days. I continued with my work at the school, where I was performing investor services, and with my work among the people for our holy cause. Thus, the days passed in Petrich and in Pirin Macedonia. At the same time, we were also handling the documents for registering our organization at the district court in Blagovevgrad. But let me return to 19th May when, after spending the night on the shores of the beautiful Lake Doiran, I attended the rally held at the Yugoslav-Greek border near Gevgelija. There a large crowd had gathered, around 4,000 people. A special stage had been set up. Here I met Vasil Tupakovsky, whom I had seen on Skopje television speaking at the rally held on 20th February 1990 in support of the national rights of Macedonians in the Pirin part of Macedonia. In the afternoon, the rally organizers gave speeches aimed at breaking the border. A particularly emotional speech was delivered by Dr. Vasil Tupakovsky, a member of the presidency of SFRY, who declared that he assumed full responsibility for the border breach, which was met with thunderous applause from the 40,000 attendees. When it was announced over the microphone that the president of the United Macedonian Organization, Ilinden, Stojan Georgiev, would address the gathering, the thousands of supporters of our difficult struggle erupted in applause. I spoke briefly and with emotion. What I said exactly is recorded on tape, but during my speech I was interrupted several times. When I finished, the 1,000-strong crowd chanted, "Macedonia, Macedonia, Macedonia!" In the evening we departed for Skopje. In the meantime I had spoken with my wife by phone, after which she came to Skopje for 3 days. Then my wife returned and I stayed because on the 10th of July I was scheduled to depart for Copenhagen. There at the Human Dimension Conference of the CSCE, I was supposed to participate as a representative of OMO Ilinden from the Pirin part of Macedonia. Before departing for Copenhagen, I went to Belgrade to obtain a visa from the Danish embassy, but without success as the Danish authorities did not grant it. I would have had to go to Sofia, but there it was unlikely I would receive a visa, as it was not in Bulgaria's interest. So I took a risk. I boarded the plane in Belgrade without a visa. The plane flew for 2.5 hours over a sea of clouds until we approached Denmark, a country interspersed with many bodies of water. We successfully landed at Copenhagen Airport, and what a spacious and modern building it was at the airport customs service. I saw such a marvel for the first time. What beauty! What cleanliness! I don't believe there is anything like it anywhere in the Balkans. The customs control allowed all the members of our delegation through, but they stopped me because I didn't have a visa. Thanks to Georgi Savov, who met us after a 40-minute delay, the Danish authorities stamped a visa in my passport, and I was able to attend the Conference on European Security and Cooperation, which was held at the Bella Center in Copenhagen. On the first day, the delegation was led by Georgi Dimitrovsky from Skopje. On the second day, 2 very intelligent young men from Australia, Michael Radden and Chris Popov, arrived. These young men, along with the married couple Mary and Trajan Dimitriou from Canada, were the soul of our Macedonian delegation. They conducted many diplomatic conversations with representatives from 25 non-governmental delegations from European countries. Naturally, we, along with Christos Sideropoulos from Thessaloniki, president of the Movement for Human Rights of Macedonians from the Aegean part of Macedonia, were at the center of attention as we were engaged in the real struggle. Christos spoke in Greek and Trajan Dimitriou translated his words into English, while I spoke in Bulgarian, and Chris Popov translated for me. With the French delegation, I conducted the dialogue in French. During the conversations, I changed tactics. Initially, at the start of the discussions, representatives of other delegations asked questions, and we answered them. Diplomats learned who we were, what we were about, what we offered, what resources we had, etc. And we learned nothing from them, whether they knew anything about us Macedonians, whether we existed as a people, as a nation, in their understanding. This led me to wonder what they knew about us Macedonians before coming to the CSC forum in Copenhagen. So, my first question to the English was, "Gentlemen, do you know that in the Balkans, in Bulgaria and Greece, there is a Macedonian people and what is happening with them?" The English diplomat smiled easily and responded quite seriously. "We know very well that Macedonians live in Bulgaria and Greece and what is happening with that people. Since Christos Sideropoulos had already spoken about the treatment of Greeks towards Macedonians living in the Aegean part of Macedonia, and I had stated that hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Macedonians had been through the camps and prisons of socialist Bulgaria, simply because we feel like Macedonians and want our national and human rights, which were taken away from us in 1948, to be restored. I asked the American representatives the following question. If the Bulgarian government continues to act against us Macedonians in the same way, would the Americans take any action? Here is what one of them said. "Please take this business card. If any of you are arrested for defending your rights, you can call this number, 2022-251901, at the White House. We will not allow even for an hour that any of you be held as a political prisoner." We from the Macedonian delegation thanked Mr. Orestes Stojak for his kind words, with the hope that democracy will continue to develop in the Balkans and that the perspective for resolving the Macedonian question is near. And in response to the American representative's question to us Macedonians, how do you see the resolution of the Macedonian question? We presented the following stance. Europe and the Balkans without borders, and the Macedonian people will be the unifying link among all Balkan nations. Undoubtedly, they are blood-related to them. We must fight for the spiritual unification of the Macedonian people from the three parts of Macedonia, to have our national and human rights recognized and respected, just as we respect the rights of other nations and minorities. For all discussions and notes, the others from Canada and Australia took the lead. I particularly remembered the conversation I had with the well-established comrades from the Bulgarian delegation, led by Georgi Dimitrov. First, I asked him to respond to the following questions. Does the Macedonian nation exist or not? What is the population in the Socialist Republic of Macedonia? Bulgarian or Macedonian? Will OMO Ilinden be legalized or not? If our organization is not legalized, what will happen to its members? The comrades were kind enough to provide the following answers. We advocate that each person, according to their own conscience, determines what they are, Bulgarian or Macedonian. Bravo, I said. That completely matches all the human rights documents that Bulgaria has signed. As for the Macedonian nation, we can say that we support the declaration of the National Assembly of the People's Republic of Bulgaria from 6th of March 1990, which states that there is no Macedonian nation and Macedonian people. From everything we have said so far, it follows that the population of the Socialist Republic of Macedonia is Bulgarian. We cannot say anything about OMO Ilinden. Thank you for your answers, I said. Now listen to my answers to the same questions. The Macedonian people and the Macedonian nation do exist. They live in the three parts of Macedonia, even if some people don't like it. This people is recognized by all countries in the world, with the exception of Bulgaria and Greece. Bulgarian media state that if a memorandum under the protection of the UN is implemented in the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, 90% of that population will declare itself as Bulgarian. I say that this is a big lie that the Bulgarians want us Macedonians from the Pirin part of Macedonia to believe. Before coming to Copenhagen, I traveled throughout the Socialist Republic of Macedonia, and everywhere I went I asked people, what are we, brothers, Bulgarians, Serbs, Greeks, or something else? And I received this kind of answer. Where do you see Bulgarians, Serbs, or Greeks here? Where are they? We are Macedonians and nothing else. Since you claim that the Macedonians from the Pirin and Vardar parts of Macedonia are Bulgarians, why do you remain silent about the Bulgarians in the Aegean part of Macedonia? Or, for the small concession from the Greeks who trumpet that there is no Macedonian nation, do you erase the Bulgarians who lived in that part of Macedonia? Since you say that there is no Macedonian nation and Macedonian people, ask these people sitting opposite you, members of the Macedonian delegation, why they have flown thousands of kilometers from Australia, America, Canada and European countries to come here and say that they are Bulgarians or Macedonians. Here they are, sitting in front of you, please ask them. No one dared to ask anything. Only engineer Gotse Davidov, representative of the Macedonians from Czechoslovakia, said, "What do these Bulgarians want?" Thus ended our conversation with the Bulgarian delegation. The press conference we held as members of the Macedonian delegation for the journalists on Friday was also interesting. On the 15th July, in one of the halls of the Bella Center. Naturally, all members of the Bulgarian and Greek delegations were also present at this conference. Initially, I spoke about the situation of the Macedonians in Pirin. During my presentation, I was interrupted by a question from a professor of the Bulgarian delegation. "Mr. Georgiev, why didn't you come to Sofia to the Human Rights Committee before coming to this great forum? There, I believe, we could have discussed your Macedonian question." And here is how I answered him. "Mr. Professor, you seem as if you've just fallen from Mars. Why do you speak like that? Do you know how many people have been through the concentration camps and prisons of socialist Bulgaria just for feeling like Macedonians? If you want to know, I am one of them. I spent 2 periods of 4 years each in prison." I said these bitter words a bit agitated, as my heart was filled with much suffering, and I had endured many difficult days, so I couldn't remain calm. No one from the Bulgarian delegation said a word in response. When Risto from Thessaloniki spoke about the difficulties faced by Macedonians in Greece, he was similarly interrupted by Professor Samaris. "Do you hear, gentlemen, how beautifully he speaks Greek? This one lies that he is Macedonian, he is Greek." When Samaris's words were translated from English to Greek, Risto said in poor Macedonian, "How can I speak Macedonian when I have spent my whole life learning Greek? My mother and father know a little Macedonian, but we are forbidden to learn in Macedonian in schools." Just as with the Bulgarian professor, the Greek professor could not respond. When Risto finished his speech, I said, "Don't you see, gentlemen, the tragedy of this unfortunate Macedonian people on the Balkans? Risto lives in Greece and cannot speak Macedonian. I live in Bulgaria and also cannot speak Macedonian. And we are brothers. We are one people. We are Macedonians." For Risto and thousands like him, the Greeks do not allow them to learn Macedonian, and for me and thousands like me, the Bulgarians do not allow us to learn Macedonian. What a miserable and fragmented people we Macedonians are. We are one and the same people, yet in Bulgaria they say we are Bulgarians, in Greece they say we are Greeks, in Serbia that we are Serbs. Finally, will civilized Europe not help, so that the Balkan states with Asiatic thinking can somewhat civilize themselves? Europe needs to know that if the Macedonian question is not resolved, there will never be peace in the Balkans, and Macedonia will forever remain a stage for bloody dramas and an apple of discord. All Balkan governments need to realize that their path to Europe passes through Macedonia. For these words, I was warmly applauded by those present at the press conference. The Greek representatives at the CSKE compromised themselves before the global public, when one of them was repeatedly caught secretly removing documents displayed by our delegation for the information of delegates from European countries, and was reprimanded by the CSCE president. This was reported by 3 Danish newspapers. When I returned from Copenhagen, I learned that in my hometown of Petrich, the president of the pro-Bulgarian Cultural and Educational Society, Todor Alexandrov, Georgi Margaritov, on 25th of May 1990, had written a letter to the president of the CSCE stating that I was mentally ill, a self-appointed leader, etc. I personally had the chance to read a duplicate of that letter, which we then placed in the file of our organization, and in the newspaper Diagol, which is published in Sofia, one of the representatives of the puppet Union of Macedonian Cultural and Educational Societies in Sofia, Stojan Georgiev, wrote, "Stojan Georgiev, before leaving for Copenhagen, spent a week studying in Skopje, then travelled to Denmark with a Yugoslav visa. There, Mr. Georgiev could not answer a single question. He only stated that he had served 2 four-year prison terms over the Macedonian issue. However, we have reliable information that he was imprisoned as a criminal. Soon we will receive documents from the Blagoevgrad court that will prove to the public that Georgiev is a criminal. I sent a response to the same newspaper, Diagol, regarding Mr. Stojan Boyadziev's article, but unfortunately it was not published because it was not in the interest of Mr. Boyadziev and Bulgaria. In my letter, I wrote that a person should above all have a conscience and at least a little morality so as not to write such fabrications and not to disgrace himself before society. If I were in Mr. Boyadziev's place, I would surely hide at the bottom of the earth so that no one could see me. How could I write about a person, something I had neither seen nor dreamed of? I was in Copenhagen from the 10th June to the 17th in 1990, and Mr. Boyadziev, if he was ever there, was probably there after my departure from Copenhagen to Bulgaria. Neither did we meet, nor did we see each other, nor did we have any telephone conversations with him. I think this case does not deserve attention. However, it does show the means by which the Bulgarian authorities act to somehow prove that the leaders of OMO Ilinden are people without morals, that they are criminals, etc. More than 100 articles have been published in Bulgarian newspapers against our organization, but not a single one of our responses was published. Once we went to a meeting to discuss with the current president of Bulgaria, Zelu Zelev, but he was not there. 5 members of the coordinating council of OMO Ilinden went and were received by Georgi Avramov, Zelev's secretary. He promised us that my article, Over Pirin, the Clouds Are Thickening, would be published in the newspaper Democracy, the organ of the opposition. However, neither did they publish my article in Democracy, nor the many letters we sent to the National Assembly of the People's Republic of Bulgaria. Over Pirin, the Clouds Are Thickening, regarding the rally in Skopje held on 20th of February 1990, many leading figures from parties and from the government of the People's Republic of Bulgaria stated that in Bulgaria there is no party with a Macedonian platform, and there is not a single person who would claim to be Macedonian. Regarding the submission of the petition by the members of the independent OMO Ilinden to the National Assembly of the People's Republic of Bulgaria, the newspaper Rabotnichesko Delo published a critical article titled 30 Separatists Before the NDK, accusing the participants in the submission of the petition as traitors. In the article A Screen for the Informed and the Naive, published in the newspaper Duma on April 21, 1990, signed by Professor Dr. Dobrin Mitev, Associate Professor Stojan Georgiev, and Senior Research Fellow Anton Prvanov, it is written, "What does the newly invented organization Ilinden represent? What are its goals? What are its activities and supporters?" And in the article Anti-Bulgarian Provocation Against the Name and Work of Yannis Sandansky, published in the same newspaper on 23rd of April, among other things, it is written, "The servants of Macedonism turned the Popular Assembly into their own pre-election rally." The text concluded with the words, "As for the immediate organizers of the banned anti-Bulgarian rally, the law should be applied to them with all its severity. With the same severity they call for from the Bulgarian television screen. We, the organizers of the commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the tragic death of Yannis Sandansky, consider the described worthless attacks as unworthy of a pluralistic and lawful state, such as the People's Republic of Bulgaria claims to be after 10th November 1990. We regard them as a mark of totalitarianism. Others call for the prosecutor's office to perform its role. They intimidate us. It feels like the clouds over Pirin are thickening as before a storm. We clearly ask, what is our worship of the heroism of Yannis Sandansky worth to you? We are a democratic organization and want our rights as Macedonians to be recognized through peaceful means. We do not claim secession of Pirin Macedonia from the People's Republic of Bulgaria. Just as the rights of the Turks and Pomaks were recognized, so too should ours be recognized. Macedonians are sometimes treated even worse than the Roma. The Roma have the Democratic Union Roma, but we Macedonians are not allowed to register our organization. It hurts when here in Bulgaria we are called Bulgarians, in Greece Greeks, while we are one people. We, the organizers, are not servants of Macedonism. Were Gotse Delchev, Yane Sandansky, Nikola Karev, Gotse Petrov, and thousands of other known and unknown fighters fallen in the struggle for the liberation of Macedonia servants? No, in no way. They fought for the freedom of the Macedonian people and served it faithfully. But they were never, and to no one were servants. Not to Bulgarian propaganda, nor to Greek, nor to Serbian. They fought a life-and-death struggle, both against the centuries-old oppressor and the agents of foreign propaganda. So it is with us. We are not servants of Macedonism, but we faithfully serve the Macedonian people. If for you the Macedonian people do not exist, that is your business. For us, the Macedonian people are alive and live in the three parts of Macedonia, and also outside of it. We are its sons. Is it desecration for us, the followers of Yane Sandansky, to make a platform at his grave? And what have the followers of those who killed him 75 years ago done at his grave? Isn't that desecration? Or other professors, associate professors, research fellows, do you differ from them? Didn't the collaborators of your idols Ivan Garvanov, Boris Sarafov, Todor Alexandrov, General Tsonchev, Dimo Hajidimov, Taskata Serki, and hundreds of other worthy sons of the Macedonian people? After all, why does the activity of those 30 separatists disturb your peace so much? Or do you doubt that there are only 30 of them? At the commemoration on 21st April 1990, the organizers from the BSP provided free transportation from Sofia, Blagovevgrad, Sandansky, and Petrich to the Rozhen monastery. However, despite this, only around 1,000 people gathered. For our members and sympathizers, all forms of transportation were prohibited. In Petrich, the Sunday before our commemoration on 22nd April 1990, 90 people paid 350 leva each for transportation to the Rozhen monastery. But by order of the city president, buses were not provided for the celebration. Many citizens were disappointed by the ill-considered actions of the city administration. This angered our sympathizers, who, from 8 to 11 in the morning, on 22nd of April 1990, did not allow any bus to enter or leave the bus station. Why provoke the people? Nevertheless, despite the bans, over 10,000 citizens attended the gathering and gave a warm applause to the speakers at the rally. The Coordinating Council of the United Macedonian Organization Ilinden regrets that one of the speakers went beyond the acceptable limits, causing protests from the Bulgarian public. The Coordinating Council expresses its unease due to the unfounded attacks on us, the organizers of the rally, in the media. For us, the role of the Macedonian people in the Balkans can only be unifying. We do not want to set borders near the village of Barakovo, just as we do not want borders near the village of Zlatorino. We believe that in the new European home that is to be built, all nations, nationalities, and minorities will receive their rights. This is what we strive for and what we have been fighting for all these years. They write that we are a separatist organization, but why do they not print in any newspaper the constitution and program of the OMO Ilinden? Surely they are afraid that the people will understand what we want and what we are fighting for. Why didn't they allow the Bulgarian and Macedonian public to see what was happening at the Rozhen monastery on 22nd April 1990 through Bulgarian television? Everything was recorded on videotape by Bulgarian and Macedonian television, and the Bulgarians have the footage of the assembly from 2 television stations. Many questions from OMO Ilinden, but not a single answer from either the official Bulgarian authorities or any party in Bulgaria. And they claim there is democracy there, and I say, well done to you for such democracy. One of the documents submitted to all delegations and participants at the KEBS in Copenhagen on 11th of April 1990. Next chapter. Regarding the human rights of the Macedonians. Today, on the threshold of the 21st century, as the Berlin Wall has fallen, as the world steps towards the fundamental civilizational message of peace among nations, and as Europe finds answers to human rights, the specters of war once again threaten the Balkans. For decades there has been no peace in the Balkans simply because the national and human rights of Macedonians are not recognized, and we assure you that there will be no peace in the Balkans until the rights of Macedonians are acknowledged. This is our deep conviction, and if the Bulgarian, Greek and Serbian policies do not grasp this alternative, Macedonia will, as always, remain an apple of discord, a stage for bloody dramas for all the Balkan peoples for eternity. The Greeks claim Macedonians are Greeks. There is no Macedonian nation. The Serbs declare Macedonians are Serbs. There are no Macedonians. And the Bulgarians have repeated 1,000 times, Macedonia is a Western Bulgarian kingdom. They carry flags with the inscription Moesia Thrace Macedonia. This absurd longing for an outlet to the three seas, the Black, White and Adriatic Seas, has brought so many sacrifices to all Balkan peoples, but most of all to the Macedonian people. Dear sirs, even today, 6 months after the fall of Todor Zhivkov in Bulgaria, after the onset of democratic changes and the establishment of a multi-party system, as well as the recognition of the rights of Turks, Pomaks and Roma, the official authorities and newly established parties still deny the existence of the Macedonian minority. They say, there are no Macedonians in Bulgaria. The population of SR Macedonia is Bulgarian. Today, in this Europe, in Bulgaria, if someone declares themselves a Macedonian, they are immediately marked as undesirable and will be persecuted down to the 9th generation. We, the Macedonians from the United Macedonian Organization Ilinden, declare, return to us the rights that were taken away, rights that were established by the Bled Agreements of 1st August 1947, when the Pirin region of Macedonia was granted cultural autonomy and Macedonians were granted national rights. At that time, the Macedonian language was taught in schools, Macedonian history was studied, and more. Dear sirs, today in Europe, in the Balkans, Macedonia is divided into 3 parts. Its fate is the most tragic in Europe. There is no people in Europe more unfortunate than the Macedonian people. For centuries, this Macedonian people have fought for their rights, but the appetites of the surrounding states have always been an obstacle to the realization of the rights of the Macedonians. Despite the extremely repressive policy that has been implemented for decades in Bulgaria, we, the Macedonians of the Pirin region of Macedonia, have, since our basic national rights were taken away in 1948, embarked on a long struggle for the rights of Macedonians, despite being brutally persecuted by the Bulgarian authorities. And all because we felt like Macedonians, which is a natural and lawful human right. Just for this feeling, thousands of us have passed through the prisons and camps of socialist Bulgaria. We ask you, sirs, is it a crime for a person to feel like a Macedonian? Today, for this feeling, a person is persecuted and expelled in Bulgaria and Greece. We have come here before this high forum, convinced that the remaining 10 years until the threshold of the 21st century will be years of hope for all the peoples of Europe, including the Macedonian people. We are confident that the Balkan peoples will follow the path of Europe in recognizing the rights of all peoples, including the Macedonian people, because all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, as Article 1 of the Declaration of Human Rights states. Our great Macedonians said many years ago that the peoples of the Balkans, Serbs, Greeks, Roma, Turks, Bulgarians, Albanians and all others, should live as brothers, and the world should be only a field for cultural competition among the peoples, Gotse Delchev and Jane Sandanski. We rightfully expect that Europe will not remain indifferent to our demands to raise its voice for the rights of Macedonians, among other reasons, because the fate of Macedonians and Macedonia was once shaped by Europe itself. I, as the president of the United Macedonian Organization, Ilinden, on behalf of all its members and sympathizers, and on my own behalf, humbly ask the esteemed representatives of the non-governmental delegations, as well as the respected president of the CSCE, to show understanding and take appropriate actions to resolve this vital issue of ours. I hope, Mr. President, that this request of ours presented before you will not remain a lone voice in the wilderness. Next chapter, Impressions, a conversation with my sister, Elena, about Macedonia. One evening, returning from the village of Dolno Spancevo, where we often visit a very good friend of mine, Atanas Gadzanov Tanzuro, My wife and I decided to stop by my sister Lenka's place, who lives in Petrich, 2 kilometers away from us. When my sister saw us getting out of the car, she came towards us with the words, "You're arriving just when I needed you. I was planning to come to you tomorrow." I could see she was deeply concerned that something was bothering her. "What's this fear, sister?" I asked her, worried. "What has happened? Tell me." "Ah, Stojan, the whole town is talking that you've started with your Macedonian activities again. Dear sister, if you want to know, I have never stopped working for Macedonia. The difference is that with the democracy unfolding in Bulgaria, we have now openly entered the political scene of Macedonia. We are not hiding. We openly declare who we are and what we are fighting for. Tell me, brother, what are you lacking? Don't you have a car? Don't you have a house? Don't you have a wife? Don't you have children? You even have grandchildren already. Look, sister, it doesn't suit you to speak like that. You are a woman of retirement age, so tell me, why do you still go to work in the toxic air of the greenhouses? Do you lack money, or is it something else? I have everything, brother, but it's better for me there. If I stay home, the grandchildren, God bless them, will drive me crazy. There, you've found your justification. Now listen to mine. I have everything too, a house, a car, a wife, children, and even grandchildren. God bless them. But what I lack is Macedonia. Who can take Macedonia from your heart? My sister asked. No one, but if you can't freely say I am a Macedonian, then what kind of Macedonia can I have? Well then, my dear Sister Elena persisted, Mother is sick, so at least for her sake you should stop. Dear sister, both our mother and our father, God rest his soul, and our children and our grandchildren, all of us are a natural occurrence, earthly people here today, gone tomorrow, but Macedonia is one from the ages for the ages. So you love Macedonia more than our mother? Yes, sister, Macedonia above all. For her, for Mother Macedonia, it is worth living, suffering, and dying. Seeing that she couldn't convince me, my sister turned to my wife. And you, Marie, you suffered so much when Stojan was in prison. Why don't you tell him to give up on Macedonia? Listen, Aunt Lench, he didn't give up when the children were very young, and now he will never give up. I don't interfere with him. He can do whatever he wants. Bravo, you're both crazy, my sister said in despair. Dear sister, don't you know that everyone has their fate written, and whatever is written on your head, you will go through it. Let's talk about something else. You, brother-in-law Nazi, how are you spending your retirement days? I asked my brother-in-law, who until then had not taken any part in the conversation. I'm fine, thank you, he said. But I think your sister is right. Why should it always be the same ones going to prison? Because everyone guards their own peace, and no one thinks about the people. Do you know how scattered our people are and how many sacrifices they've made for their freedom? Our father was a revolutionary too. He has many photographs in his revolutionary clothes. But times are different now. Maybe you're right, but aren't we part of these times too? Should we just passively watch what's happening to our unfortunate Macedonian people? They won't even let you sing a Macedonian song or read a Macedonian newspaper, while in the Socialist Republic of Macedonia they have everything. That's true, but don't you see what the authorities do to people like you? Yes, I see that. And I see the dulled Macedonian consciousness in thousands like you. That's what hurts me. That's why I wrote the article Macedonian Wake Up. Final chapter. At the Makfest in Stip in 1990, I had the opportunity and good fortune to attend one of the most significant musical events this year in Socialist Republic of Macedonia, Macfest. Stip 90, which took place on 11th, 12th and 13th October in the town of Stip at the Cultural Centre. This was my first time staying in this unique Macedonian town where Gotse Delchev had the chance to meet Damai Gruev and work as a teacher. On Friday, 11th of October, I was supposed to leave with Ilia Stoyanov, the director of the private bookstore Vesilka in Bitola, one of the festival's sponsors, to pick up my wife, Maria, at the border. However, he was occupied with other urgent matters, so we postponed the trip to Saturday. But even on Saturday, he couldn't find enough free time, so he kindly sent 2 of his employees with their car to take me to the border at Zlatorevo at 1 p.m. When we arrived, I was already 30 minutes late because the car broke down before entering the city of Strumica, and I had to find another ride. My wife was already waiting at the Macedonian customs, where we had previously arranged to meet. I apologized to my Maria, and we immediately left to join our friends, who had already repaired the car, and together we headed to the town of Stip. 10 minutes before the music program was about to start, we arrived at the cultural center. Our friends had only 2 tickets for the festival, but it wasn't difficult to secure another 2 for my wife and me. Since February this year, I had already visited the Socialist Republic of Macedonia 8 times and had the fortune to attend many significant gatherings, but this was my first time attending a music festival. I was amazed as soon as I entered the hall, filled with young and beautiful people. The stage had such a natural decor that I had never seen anywhere in Bulgaria until that day. Our Macedonian brothers here have great experience in organizing such festivals. I say have because even Folkfest Valandovo 90, which I watched on videotape, was also conducted at a very high level. Makfest, Stip 90, impressed me with its international lineup of performers, who sang exclusively in the Macedonian language, as well as with the content of the melodies of the songs themselves, along with the performers' experience in engaging the audience's attention, received resounding applause. The highlight was the performance of the song Zvonat Zvonat by the talented singer Ljupka Dimitrovska. The content of that song is so powerful, so emotional, as if it rings for all Macedonians scattered across various parts of the world. I thought it rings for all the separated Macedonian families in whatever way they were divided. Seeing that during the performance of the song, my Maria couldn't hold back her tears, I thought she was recalling the years from 1973 to 1976, when we were separated, me in prison, and she, with 2 small children, unhappily wandering around the Stara Zagora prison, waiting to catch a glimpse of me through the metal bars. I thought she was crying because at any moment the Bulgarian authorities could once again separate us for who knows how long, and how beautifully that wonderful Ljupka sang, "If only you had called, if only you had given me hope, I would still cry, I would still wait for you for a long time." Tears welled up in my eyes too, for my heart is filled with sorrow, and I feel that soon I will once again be separated from my family for a long time. But such is the fate of Macedonians, a lifetime of being separated and shedding tiny tears. Oh, Mother, Mother Macedonia, how much I love you, and how deeply I cherish you. Everything I suffer is for you, Mother, and for your unfortunate, fragmented Macedonian people. That's why I think there is no other land in the world as sung about as Mother Macedonia. Around 11 that evening, at the cocktail party held in honor of the winners of Macfest Stip, 2 beautiful women around 43 or 44 years old approached me. They said they recognized me from television and wanted to speak with me personally. They promised to come to the hotel on Sunday, 14th October, at 10 in the morning, for a longer conversation. At the agreed time, the lovely Ljubitsa and her husband, Panche Nastev, were kind enough to visit us. Later he excused himself, saying he had guests, leaving Ljubitsa, that wonderful woman from Stip, to keep us company. Panche is to be commended for having such a kind and humane wife. I have spoken with women in other cities in Macedonia about our sacred cause, but I have never encountered anything like this. I believe that in Ljubitsa, all the goodness, all the sorrow, and all the humanity of all Macedonians together are gathered. When I told her about my life and my wife's life while I was in prison, that poor woman just cried, as if she wanted to take away from us our difficulties, our great struggles, our happiness. I deeply believe that Ljubitsa would share the misfortune of mine or any other woman with dignity, if Mother Macedonia were to demand it, God forbid. Yes, such strong women give us Macedonians from Pirin the courage to fight to the end for our human and national rights. I am writing these lines here in Bitola, just one day after having happily spent 2 days in the city of Stip, and my heart is beating wildly, as if it wants to leap out of my chest. Interestingly, where does this unstoppable, perpetual motion machine in me find so much strength? Without having run, without having exerted myself physically, only at the thought of something sacred, it starts beating so wildly, so hard, that I have to press it with both hands to keep it from jumping out. Because lately, I have begun to live with the thought that I will die only from a heart attack. I say all this not out of a desire to be interesting, but because it is the simple truth, the whole truth. Otherwise, I don't even want to think about dying because I believe we owe much to Mother Macedonia. We still have much to give for that poor, sad Macedonia. The end.